Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. Prior to full interconnection and the complete digitization of music mastering, we had in this country pockets of eccentric engineers who more often than not wore more than one hat. Rudy Van Gelder held down the fort in Englewood Cliffs while performing optometry in the daytime. Michael Cuscuna found his way to Woodstock engineering Bonnie Raitt, all the while hosting freeform radio programs and writing liner notes. The same can be said for Marty Feldman in Chicago and Eddie Harris. Major cities in this country had venerable studios that cooked with music from across all musical spectrums. Chess Records in Chicago, Stax Records in Memphis, Muscle Shoals in Alabama, Sigma Sound in Philadelphia, MoTown in Detroit, and the Record Plant in Los Angeles. Another major record creator was Fantasy Records. My guest today was a major engineer during the gravy years of the studio after Max and Saul Weiss sold the shop to Saul Zaentz. But as with all other engineers, my guest was a jack of all trades. He was the rhythm and blues drummer for the label when they were still in Oakland, playing with Ray Shanklin and Tower of Power singer Lenny Williams. When he became the lead engineer at Fantasy, he sought out and trained younger cats on how to create a warm room sound. When Fantasy expanded, he was responsible for outfitting the studios and then hunkering down with a heavy axe in David Axelrod, Butterfly Dreaming with Flora Purim, Tom Boo with Cal Jader and Charlie Bird, and N2 Troop with Gary Bartz. He was immersed with all types of musicians, cats like Sonny Rollins, who might come out to cut an album before heading to Japan, to Country Joe and other Bay Area mainstays who helped liven up sessions just by being within the complex. Put in a live audience for Joe Williams or Cannonball, or work with Ed Bogus on arrangements for the Vibes of Truth. This was coupled with a very open radio dial, which played a lot of local area favorites like the aforementioned Jader, Jerry Garcia, and Merle Saunders and Bola Sete. It should be noted that without Born on the Bayou, none of this might have ever happened. You listen to the warmth that these records give off, the homey, close-knit quality and the musicians' understanding of how special a place it was, and you begin to see how regional music developed. Orrin Keepnews' relocation to Berkeley and the acquisition of the Prestige catalog only furthered the eclecticism of the musicians. All of a sudden, McCoy Tyner found a home there. So did Larry and Franz Mizell, as well as Wayne Henderson and Woody Herman. It was a family of Zen tricksters who cared about the music and the musicians. Things were cut using analog, so there was no way to put lipstick on a pig if Pleasure or the Vibes of Truth flubbed some lyrics. You couldn't fix crappy instrumental takes. The artists had to know their shit, and so did the producers and the arrangers and the engineers. Everybody's craft was respected, and because of the amount of effort put forth by the team, often a good product came out. Jim Stern, it's an honor to welcome you to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you, Jake. It's an honor to be on your show.
You know, I was hoping for the audience you could go back and talk about how you originally met Dan Healy.
Dan Healy, wow, okay. How did I originally meet Dan? Okay, I met Dan Healy because I was jamming at the Grateful Dead house on Ashford Street. Jerry Garcia and Bobby Weir had been helping me, and I was jamming there at the house, and Danny was the sound man for the Dead. And he was jamming, there was a guitar player there and some other people, and when the Dead took over the Carousel Ballroom and started running it sort of basically in competition with the Fillmore, after a while, they decided to have a Tuesday jam night. It was Mickey Hart and Jerry Garcia and Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy. And so, and Mickey had invited me up to hear him play. And the next week, Bobby Weir called and asked me if I would be the drummer. And Danny was the bass player in that. And we went on to form a group called, well, it was originally Hoffman's Bicycle, about Albert Hoffman falling off his bike, but it just became the Bicycle, and we went through all the usual rock and roll painful.
Wait, hold on a second. Healy was playing bass at the Carousel. He was playing bass in the band?
He was playing bass. He had ambitions to be a bass player, and he was playing bass, and that was the Bicycle for a while, and then it split up for a lot of different reasons, and then he went back to just engineering. and I kept playing. But
I guess
how I met him.
Yeah, no, I mean that. Well, that. Wow. No, I was going to say that. What was the genesis behind wanting to, go from the carousel, split off from the film? Why did they want to have their own place?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Okay. But in any event, you were very connected. You were in. Would you say that you were immersed in that scene even before you were an engineer?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the other ways that Dan and I became friends, they built. I don't know who originally started it and all, but there was a rock and roll recording studio built in San Francisco at 60 Brady Street. It was called Pacific High Recording, and then it went on to be various other iterations over the years. But Dan was doing some work there. I helped him build the echo chamber, and I think I helped him do some wiring there too. I'm not really sure. And I did a bunch of sessions there for a number of producers. And, in those days, there weren't a lot of recording studios around. So, there was only, a few of them, and you worked in all of them because that was the way it was in those days.
And then, and could you give me a year on when this was?
Oh boy, I don't know. I can't. It was in the '60s. I know that.
Was it? But but pre-65 or what? It sounds like
maybe around then, 65, 6, somewhere in there. I guess. I've got to be really honest with you. I was there, so I remember it, but I can't tell you what date.
Yeah, no. It's just you can figure out some of the stuff too, but it's. I guess more importantly, as a drummer, who were you locked into? I mean, were you marinating? I mean, were you just picking up on all the sounds of the Bay, or were you?
I wasn't really listening to the Bay at all. I was listening to Art Blakey, and I was listening to Jim Capaldi, and I was listening to Mitch Mitchell and to Ginger Baker, and I was listening to George Raines, and I was listening to everybody. I mean, you name it, I was listening to him because I was interested, especially if it was something different. Capaldi was different. He was playing a very different style of rock and roll drumming, and I loved it, so I learned everything he did. And, I would learn what everybody was doing so I could play along with them exactly, so I understood what their feeling was. I didn't want to imitate them, but it became like any other musician when you're learning and you're learning from others and the stalwarts of your profession. You internalize that, and then when you go to play, you don't want to actually copy them. You just want to play what's coming out of you, and some of their influences are in you. So
absolutely, no. Any cat will say that they borrow from or they take from others, but then they incorporate their own style. So yeah, you're just. But you were. There were no. How would you look at it? Being somebody. I mean. Were labels used? I mean, you just went across the board from Art Blakey to Capaldi to Mitch Mitchell. But how was it being? Was it just music at that time?
Well, it's always been just music.
Well, but I'm talking about in linguistic terms. Like, was there labels attached to the music?
I don't know. I never paid attention to that. I really didn't. I've listened to the music I liked. The first drummer I remember liking was Gene Krupa, and then Jack Sperling, and a few people like that, and Sid Catlett, and some other guys that actually, and of course, there's a few people that just set the standards, and everybody listened to them. But the point is that if you're going to put a label on it, then you're a label person, and you're thinking in terms of labels. I'm thinking in terms of music. If I like the music, I'm interested. I don't know what you would call it. I mean, obviously, if it's country music, it's country, or if it's jazz, it's jazz. But I never really thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm. So, your first band? What was the first band that you were in?
Oh God, I don't know. I've been playing since I was a kid, man. I have no idea. There were a lot of groups I don't even remember names of. I played a lot of top 40. Bar bands, put myself through college to get my electronics degree. And
I guess. How did you get the gig? How did you get the gig at the original Fantasy Studios in Oakland?
Okay, I had come back from Big Sur. I'd been in Big Sur for a year, and I came back, and I was living in my car trying to find some work, and I ran into Dennis Whithead, who was the staff drummer at Fantasy, who was leaving to join the Paul Butterfield Better Days band in Chicago.
Unbelievable. How did you meet?
Here.
Wait, Dennis knocked on your car window or something?
No, I ran into him. I don't know where I was. It was somewhere in the city. I ran. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for work. I'm listening in my car looking for work." And he said, "Here, I'm supposed to replace myself, and I forgot to do that." And he gave me Ray Shanklin's phone number, and he said, "Call Ray Shanklin. He's the R&B producer at Fantasy, and tell him you're my replacement." So I called him, and he said, "Come on over and bring some drums." And I went over, and he said, "I'm going to overdub you on one tune for free. See what you can do." Which we did, and I was packing up the drums, and he came in, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm packing up my drums." He says, "Don't you touch them drums, boy." and that was the end of that, and I just became the staff drummer, and I was helping everybody make records because I knew audio, and I knew electronics, and I had been around studios a bunch, so I was helping them make their records, and they went to Saul, and Saul Zaentz called me and hired me, so I was the engineer, and then vice president of engineering and studio operations. I designed and built around the studios, but I really didn't really intend to do that. It just sort of was something that came along. In fact, when Saul asked me to run everything, I turned him down. I said, "I don't want to run everything." He said, "I don't care what you want." He said, "Get out of here." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Go." And that was the end of that. I was anointed, I guess you would say, but it was a great time. It was a very, very powerful time to be working for a label like that, because we were buying up all the labels and signing all these great musicians and artists, and I was right in the thick of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was just doing some background. I was just really, I wanted to ask you, what was the Lenny Williams album that you were on?
I have no idea. I don't think it was an album in those days. The R&B stuff, there weren't a lot of albums in those days. There were a lot of singles, and I have no idea, and I don't even know if I have a copy of it.
What I want you to paint the picture for me and my audience is the idea of Jim Stern going in for, give me a day's work at Fantasy, and then give me a couple of the clubs in Oakland that you would hang out at and swing at and play at. Well,
I'll be quite honest with you. I tried to stay out of Oakland. I didn't play a lot of clubs in Oakland, mostly San Francisco. I just
so you would go across the bay. That's you preferred.
I did. I played the Lucky 13 and the Lucky, what do you call it? The Lucky 7 was it? I think it was, and there was I don't know. There were several of them down on East 14th Street and all. I played a bunch of those, but a typical day for me would be, we didn't usually start before around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we'd go in the studio, and depending on what the artist was, and whether there was a producer, and whether there was a chart, and what it was, and what timing of it was, whether there were times when we had a basic rhythm section that played on everything, and there were other times when we just called in people as we needed them. So, it would depend, and then we'd play on the tune, whatever it was, and we'd pack it up and go on with the day, whatever was next in turn. Maybe he was playing at a club that night, or maybe it was just going home.
I guess, I'm being that I was born in 78, going back in time, looking at you were literally in my mind, the greatest pocket of music history. It was the early 1970s, and I look at it and I say, this is coming from Jake Feinberg, and I want to get Jim Stern's opinion on this, but it was the transition from acoustic to electric instrumentation was happening, but it hadn't become a complete electronic wizardry. The venues were still very manageable, so that if you wanted to do a record, a live record like this Cal Jader record I'm looking at that you engineered, this Concerts by the Sea, it was still intimate enough and still swung enough where the sound was just so. Rock had not invaded at that point, where the sound was still tolerant enough for some of these live albums to be made? Give me some feedback. Is there validity to that?
You know, I don't know. I don't know if I'm in a position to evaluate that, because I was very busy. I was doing a lot of work, and some people weren't busy at all. And you know, I did rock and pop and R&B and jazz and all of it. You know, in the same. I mean, I don't know how many Van Morrison albums. I did several Van Morrison albums live, and I mean, you know, that's rock and roll. And you know, there generally were larger venues, granted. The jazz venue, although some of the jazz venues were pretty big. The Montreux, I did Montreux, and I did the Tokyo Summer Jazz Festival, and I did the Milestone Jazz Stars tour. That was packed. I mean, we packed all these great theaters, and so you know, I don't know if it was just the small venues. I think it was all over the place, and a lot of people didn't like making live records because if you really held to the genre and put it out that way, it exposed some of the raw underbelly of it all. There was one particular artist who shall remain unnamed, who I set up to record at the Great American Music Hall, and they recorded the album, and then they came in the studio and replaced everything but the audience. They cleaned it up perfectly, and it was perfectly clean, and it had no more life, and it went right in the dumper, and it was a piece of junk because they took the life out of it. So the jazz guys typically, that's where they made their living. They made their living in the clubs, not from their records as much, and that's what they did. Their life was about playing music. So, you know, you talk about Woody Herman. I don't know, I did 6 or 8 Woody albums. Woody'd come in with 20 pieces, and take one was it. You know, they cut the whole album in 1 3-hour session. They'd come in and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they'd leave. And they go on to the next city and do the same thing again, because that's what they did every day. And so the level of competence and musicianship was tremendous. Van was like that. Van, everything was live. If you wanted horns and strings, they were there. And it makes people play differently. It makes them play, I think, much better. So,
why?
For me, from the standpoint of what was going on at the time, I will agree that it was a very, very powerful time for labels. I mean, we were cranking. I was running 3 studios and a mastering room, and they were running every day, 3 sessions a day in each one of them.
I mean, dude, I wanted to be a fly on the wall watching Jim Stern work in the early 70s in fantasy. It was the slickest. That's even the wrong word. It was just the hottest studio scene. And what I love the most is that it just seemed like there were just musicians coming in and crossing over. I mean, can you talk about a situation where there was somebody had a recording date, but they needed to some kind of player, a musician of sorts, and they were able to go in because there were all musicians roaming around fantasy. Someone was able to pull in someone to fill in a gap. I mean, was that happening quite a bit?
It wasn't happening quite a bit, but it did happen. It happened to for me. I was producing a Jerry Hahn, and they were playing outside, and I couldn't get them to play inside. They just that's the way they wanted to go, and you couldn't sell records like that. Nobody wanted to hear that. It was like, you know, just out there. And Merle Saunders came by and was hanging out at my office, and we were talking, and he knew Jerry, and Merle could not get outside. On the best day of his life, he couldn't play outside. Merle was a solid in-the-box player. So he knew Jerry, so I dragged him into the studio and put him on a B3, and we started cutting actual tunes because Merle,
yeah.
And that I think saved the whole album, actually.
You know, bless you, Jim Stern. I'm staring at Moses right here, and when I interviewed Jerry Hahn, he told I don't know, he may have, I forget, I lost the recorder in New York City somewhere, but he said that he wanted to have an organ player on the album. So Merle was walking by, and they grabbed him and brought him in. So I really appreciate you. I totally get it. I've interviewed Marsh, and they were an outside band. They were, and they could not play inside if their lives depended on it. And Merle couldn't play outside. You just filled that in, man. That is unbelievable.
That's what happened.
Oh, that's that is the greatest story of 2014 by far, and I've heard a bunch of them.
I got tons of them. I'm actually writing them down. I have about 30 stories written so far. So
I've heard the Merle one before. Was there another? Can you give me another story? Not where there was just spontaneity or the idea of you saying, because it was you said we can't sell records with the sound of this trio, and so you filled it. When was there another time when you filled it?
Well, I don't know if I would say I filled it that way. I didn't like doing that. I hesitated going in the studio without everything being there. The only time that we would do something like that was if somebody didn't show up. Like, God bless him, Joe Henderson, he didn't show up half the time. You know, he had a famous reputation for just not showing up.
Wow.
And it was a Floor Porum album, and he didn't show up. And I'm not sure who we used, but we found somebody, and we used somebody. I'm not sure what we did, or maybe we waited and overdubbed something. Maybe even overdubbed him. I'm not sure, but typically we didn't just grab somebody. It's dangerous to do that, you know. In the Merle case, it was just that's the way it had to be, because those guys, I'd known those guys for a long time, and basically they just played freeform. Everybody played whatever they felt like. So when it came together, you know, and then I understood, and when it came together, it was magic.
Oh,
it really was.
Man. But
you know, it was few and far between moments when it did come together. Most of the time, they were just all off wanking it on their own direction. Wait, so are you, we got away from something here. So you didn't like playing in Oakland, but you did play in San Francisco. So, yeah, well, I did play in Oakland, but not as much as in the city. The city's where I played most of my gigs.
Were you playing at Andre's or down in the Fillmore district? Where were you playing?
Oh, I played mostly the clubs. It was the library and the, I can't even remember the names of them anymore. It's been so long.
Is that where you met Merle originally, though?
No, I met Merle at Jack's of Sutter Street.
Yes. See, you played at Jack's?
I don't know if I played there or not. I just remember meeting him there.
Oh, one of my favorite. I mean, all the cats.
I might have played there.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's really hard to anymore to remember.
I know. That's my job to sort of. But you remember the Jerry Hahn story, and so did Hahn. What I love is chronicling these. That album, Jim, has gotten me through so many difficult times in my life. I mean, it's just the most. The second side is a little insane, but the title track is just, and the sound is so great. Beautiful work on that album.
Well, thank you.
But no, so you met Merle at Jack's on Sutter. You were just a patron there, and he was playing.
Yeah, I lived up the street. In fact, I lived on Sutter Street, and I went down and I hung out there a few times. I think I sat in with some people there, but I didn't actually play a gig there. But I think I did. I sat in around town. But yeah, that's where I first met him, and then I don't know. We'd run into each other around town, and we just became friends. And then he signed to Fantasy, and then we saw each other more often.
How instrumental were you in bringing in the convergence of bringing in the prestige labels? I mean, were you at that point? I mean, you made it sound that when you joined Fantasy, you sort of were doing everything almost right away. Were you part of that?
Yeah, but we weren't. When I joined Fantasy, we didn't have all those labels.
Right.
And they started, basically Saul Zaentz and Ralph Caffel and the other guys, they were record guys. They were all jazz record guys. And so when these labels they were dead labels. Prestige was dead. It was just a catalog sitting there and nothing was happening. So they bought these labels and brought the music back out again, reissued all this stuff, and brought the music back to the people again, because it was just sitting there dead. So they bought Riverside, Milestone, Prestige. They bought Stax and Volt, and they bought a bunch of them. The only one that I was actually involved in was Stax. When they weren't going to buy Stax, they sent me out to Memphis to check it out and see if it was what it was, which it was, and so we bought it. But the others, I kind of stayed out of promotion, and I stayed out of publicity, and I stayed out of all those other areas. I focused on the studios, and I just kind of stayed out of a lot of meetings. I avoided them as much as possible.
Can you talk just for my own clarity? Like, okay, so they reissued the catalogs, but that's far different than bringing these people in to play and cut albums. Can you explain how they
signed various artists as they went.
Right.
Many of them some of them would be put on Prestige or Milestone, and some of them were put on Fantasy or Galaxy or whatever label they chose to put the artist on, or whatever the artist wanted to be on. It varied accordingly. But they signed a lot of live acts, a lot of talent, but a lot of the stuff that was the catalog stuff. Some of those people were already passed away, but some of those records were classics. I mean, those were even if you sign a Cannonball Adderley or you sign a Gene Ammons or so, those records were 20 years before that, and it was a whole different thing. So, it was two different areas, putting out the catalog and putting out the new music.
Exactly.
But it was certainly a lot of fun for me. I got to work with some of the greatest players that ever played. I got to make some wonderful records, the Duke Ellingtons and the Art Blakeys and the McCoy Tyners and the Van Morrisons and even the Tommy James and the Shondells and God bless them, even Frigid Pink.
Yeah, well, no, I was gonna. You were just right. My favorite pocket of pure music is that decade of 65 to 75, and I'm just astounded that you had this just incredible opportunity to be with these. Really, the Titans really were still touring. Like, what was it like to tell me about Child's Dance, or rather the albums with Blakey? Specifically, what stands out to you is from his leadership style in the studio.
Oh boy! Well, Art was a strong guy, but they were all powerful players. But you got to remember those days. Though there were some nefarious activities going on, I'll say.
Yeah, okay. There was a lot of people chasing the dragon and stuff. Yeah.
And it was kind of tough a few times in the studio. It was kind of tough, but it was good. We got through it all. We did a couple with John Hendricks, and let's see, Woody Shaw was on some of that, and Carter Jefferson, and
Michael Howell.
But it was good. He was a no son. Once you got in the studio and got going, most of those guys were all pretty much no nonsense. Take care of business and get on with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you talk about no nonsense though, but some of these cats you knew. I mean, how did you get? You knew the Haight-Ashbury crew. You knew Garcia and Weir and those cats before you ever became an engineer at Fantasy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was born in the Haight-Ashbury.
Holy cow! So, but what was that Haight-Ashbury looking like? When I was born,
it was a wonderful neighborhood. When I was born, it was a melting pot neighborhood. I couldn't do anything on that street without my parents knowing about it. Everybody knew everybody. All the mummies were in the windows looking out, keeping track of all the kids. You couldn't do anything without getting busted. And it was great. All the kids played in the street. There was no television. It didn't exist. Well, it was invented, but there was no television. And so all the kids played in the street. That's what we did. We played in the street, and we went in for dinner, and that was that.
And then you came back out and played some more.
If it was the summertime and kids were still around, yeah. Otherwise, we would, be in the house. We'd probably, I don't know what everybody else did. We listened to the radio. We read books. We played games. We did our homework. All those things that you do. And that's where you met Weir. Weir was living there, or no? Oh no. I met Weir. When I was jamming at the Dead House. What?
So the Dead House was on Haight-Ashbury.
Well, no. There's a corner of Haight and Ashbury. The neighborhood is called the Haight-Ashbury. Their house was on Ashbury, I believe it was. I'm going to say 610 Ashbury, but I'm not sure that's right.
I think it's 710.
710. I can see the house in my brain, but I can't remember much else about it. You know, and then everybody split the city. When all these people started showing up, everybody left. A lot of people went to Marin. I went to Marin. It got pretty crazy, all these people coming from everywhere expecting, I don't know what they were expecting, but it certainly wasn't there, and what they brought with them was a lot of dysfunction, so most of us left.
Did you continue to, I mean, you've been playing your whole life, but I'm saying, what was did you seem to have a good connection with, I've interviewed Mike Clark and David Garibaldi, and there were just so many strong drummers, Jerry Granelli, there were so many beautiful cats. I mean, did you?
I know those guys, I know both those guys. I know Mike and Dave. I work with all of them. You know, I stopped playing pretty quickly when I got into engineering because I just couldn't do it all. It just was too much. I played on a few things.
Tell me.
I played on a couple of things that I produced, or if I had a budget problem, I might stick myself in there. There was one, when we bought Stax, I brought the Stax engineers out, the guys that had recorded all that. They were working at Ardent. And I hired them and brought them out to, you know, remix everything and bring it up to date so that the sound was a little more up to date for the reissue. And so what they wanted to do, because they couldn't really fix some of the sound, was they wanted to replace it. They didn't want a different part. They wanted the exact same part, but with a more modern sound. So I got various musicians who could play the Steve Cropper line and the Duck Dunn line and all, and they were replacing everything, and they couldn't find anybody to do Al Jackson. And actually, one of the guys went to him and said, you know, Jim Stern is an Al Jackson. He loves Al Jackson, and he can play Al Jackson like the back of his hand. So they came to me, and I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So but what they had me do was not replace the whole drum kit. I'd replace, like, the snare drum or the bass drum or the hi-hat, just one piece of the kit. So you had to play along with the original track just that one drum. And it had to be perfect because nobody could know that it wasn't that drum. It had to be exactly perfect because all we were doing was replacing the sound, not the style or whatever. So, and it was easy for me because I played along with Al Jackson records forever, and I could just lock with him perfectly. So
I cannot. What's so classic, man? Is like 3 days ago I find this album, Universal Language, Booker T and the MDs, dedicated to Al Jackson. Man, and I've been looking at that name for the last few days. I mean, I know him as a drummer, but just that. What a heavy dude, man! Unbelievable.
He was amazing. The album I'm thinking of was the Albert King album, The Pinch. In fact, years later, I was listening to it. I said, "God, man, Al Jackson sounds really good." He said, "No, that's you."
That is so. I mean, but so you stopped, quote unquote, playing, but you never lost your chops. I mean, you kept playing. You just didn't.
Well, yeah, I kept playing. I just stopped playing, professionally. I played for a while with a group called the Out of Hand Band at Mooney's Irish Pub on Friday and Saturday nights, but sometimes I couldn't make it because I'm stuck in the studio. And I played with them for a couple of years, but it just got to be too much trying to run around like that. So basically, I just had jam sessions at my house, and I put together a few different bands where we never had to rehearse. We never had to make a set list. We never had to do anything but show up and play because we all knew each other. We all knew all the same material. We all were good players, and so I could book a club gig in Napa or somewhere, and we just show up and play and have a great time. And so I did that for a number of years. And
that is so badass. I mean, that is. But you also have a really quality ear. I mean, you were the engineer on Johnny Hammond Smith, the Gears.
Maybe, if you say so. I can't remember them all. I mean,
it just some of the. I just feel like You were involved with some of this fascinating stuff, some of this crossover R&B stuff, like Pleasure, that band Pleasure.
Yeah, I remember Pleasure. I did Pleasure.
Because something you cannot find an original pressing of that album anywhere, and yet
that was Wayne Henderson, wasn't that?
It was. It was. You're right. It was at home, but yeah, and so as a result, there's Joe Sample playing on that album.
Yeah,
there were studio cats playing. I just was trying to figure out, was Stern? I mean, like that. There was a certain sound to that music, and I just wasn't sure how much of a role, aside from getting levels and how much of an involvement.
A lot of it depends on where things were cut. Every room is different.
Right.
Every day is different. And I'll give you an example. There's Inside Straight, the Cannonball Adderley album.
Sure.
It was done live. I did it live in Studio A. I set up Studio A as a club. Brought in a stage, a PA, tables and chairs, and a bar, and the whole thing. Set it up completely like a club so that I would have control, because it's a studio and I have the control, but it's a club. And there would be no cash registers going off. Right. So anyway, I set that up and we did the album. And I don't know, a few months later, I get a call from Cannonball. We're coming in Thursday. Find a studio. We got to replace the bridge. There's something wrong. Well, I couldn't get that studio. I couldn't,
Right, you couldn't recreate that?
I couldn't recreate what it was. The only studio I had is the smallest studio, the very smallest studio I had. And so that was what I had to do. I stuck everybody in the dinky little room, and we cut the bridge, and I cut it in. And to this day, it bothers. I can hear it. Nobody else knows, but I can hear the cut when it comes to the bridge. And if you're listening to that, I'm not sure what cut it was. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
Well, no, I don't think it was the title cut. I think it was one of the other cuts.
That's a great album, though.
And after a while, after a number of years, you listen to this stuff and you don't even hear the same things you heard back then. You don't hear what bothered you then.
Right.
It goes right by you, just like it does with other people. It's like Cuckoo's Nest. I remember complaining about the cut on Cuckoo's Nest because they would show McMurphy, then they'd show somebody else, then they'd show McMurphy and he had a beard, and they'd show somebody else and back to McMurphy and he didn't have a beard. Right. You can't do that. And they said nobody will ever know. And they were right. Nobody knew. It's in there today. I still can see. You have to look close, but it's there. Nobody knows. So it's a matter of a trade-off a lot of times. Like a Van Morrison album. A Van Morrison album it comes down to how did Van do? Because everybody's there. Everybody's in the room, and if the band played great, Van didn't do a good job, it wasn't a great performance, I throw it out.
Right.
If Van had a great performance, the band screwed up here and there, I'll fix the band. And that's the way it was. So there were a lot of times where there's things I really couldn't even fix, so it's too bad, it's on the album. And because the magic was there, the energy, the feeling, everything was right, and you can't conjure that.
You nailed it, because my favorite album, really probably my favorite album of all time. Do you remember anything about putting it together with Cal Tjader live at Concerts by the Sea? It was one of the most ridiculously funny bands. Dick Burke on drums, John Hurd.
Dick Burke. Yeah, I remember that.
Rest in peace, Dick Burke. But Michael Smith on congas.
Mike Smith, yeah, that's right. I remember Concerts by the Sea. It burned down.
But there was a track on there that it's called Manual Dig It, okay? Manual Dig It, actually, in other words. But it's a 13-minute track, and I don't know, I mean, what was your involvement as far as engineering this session? It was a live session. And
I recorded it. I hired the truck. I set it up. I recorded it. I mixed it and edited it. And mastered it.
You are... Oh my God! Just a grooving track, and you get these pickups of people, people's voices on the stage talking to each other. It's very, very. And John Hurd goes off on about a 15-minute bass solo. The stuff you did for Tjader on Fantasy is the best stuff that was ever done by far.
Well, I don't know. Cal Tjader, Cal and I were very good friends, very, very close friends. And in fact, when I went to Big Sur in 1967. He hired my band to open for his band at, it was a venue, I don't remember the venue. And I thought, my little rock and roll band down there, we were just playing rock and roll, cover tunes and everything. And
sure.
He says, no, come on and open the show for us, which was really nice of him. We spent a lot of time together. We were good friends, and I loved him dearly.
Was Armando Peraza in that band in '67?
At times, yeah.
Oh my! Yeah. You were not playing rock and roll.
Well, as a drummer, I was. I didn't play jazz. I've been playing bebop jazz now for the last 20 years. I'm in a 10-piece bebop rehearsal band.
Oh wow!
But 20 years ago, a good friend of mine called me and says, "Hey, we got this band." I said, "Well, I'm not a jazz drummer. I'm a rock R&B drummer, and I haven't even really been playing much lately." And he said, "Well, you play all those records." I said, "Yeah, but I wasn't in the band. I recorded it and I was involved in the production, but I didn't play." Well, we got nobody, so I kept time for him for 2 years. All I would do is just keep time. And after 20 years, I got some chops now. Now I sit in around the county at some of the jazz bebop jazz sessions, and I can play. I wouldn't say I don't know if I'd hire myself, but I certainly can play. And my love of jazz and my exposure to so much of the great jazz has helped me as a player tremendously. But I didn't play jazz in those days. I really didn't. I just always liked it, but I never felt I didn't have time to study and get those chops going. I was so busy with engineering and producing, I really didn't have time to study for those chops.
No, it's very when you, I don't know why I can't. So when you got there, how did Merle's first couple of albums were on like a Blue Label? I think it was. I want to say it was on Galaxy. It was like Trio.
Yeah, that probably was.
It's like Trio.
That was the R&B label. Galaxy was the R&B label at Fantasy.
Exactly. And there was Eddie Daniels. In it. Were you engineering those sessions?
Was I what? I'm sorry?
Were you engineering those sessions? With those Trio sessions? Before, I guess all I can say is by labels. When I think of labels, I think of the brown label Fantasy pressing. So I say to myself, before that it was Blue was Galaxy, or you had the red label Fantasy stuff. When did you actually, what was the color of the record when you started to engineer?
I'll be really honest with you. I don't know. I don't know. See, I was so busy. I would hand in a master tape.
Sure.
And either I went in the mastering room and mastered it myself, or I had my guy do it. And once it was mastered and the lacquers were cut, it was out of my hands. I never saw it again until it came out. And even then, the only time I saw it is a copy of it would end up on my desk, because everything that came out I got a copy of. But to this day, people will come to me and talk about a McCoy Tyner album. They'll name the album and they'll name the tune, and I don't know what they're talking about, because we didn't have a name for the album at the time, and the tune was tune number 2. I just never knew any of that stuff because it didn't exist when I turned it in. That all came about later on when they were doing the mechanicals. They got to come up with an album cover and name the tunes and name the album and do all the stuff. So all that stuff came in later, and I'd already finished all the music by the time that happened. So
I see. And you were really already on to the next probably on the next 2 projects already.
I had numbers of them going at one time. I did so many albums that I had tons of projects going on at the same time. Plus, I was running everything and designing everything and building everything and training everybody, and it was a very, 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 very hectic time for me.
Do you feel like were you able to stop and smell the roses at a certain point? Because it's almost like it happened so fast, and obviously, you're still, you're just in another chapter of your life. But that is, to be in that time period, was it just a blur, or do you feel like you were able to?
It was somewhat of a blur, but I remember most of it. It was very fast, but fast paced with a lot of stuff going on. But I did get my time to smell the roses. I was invited to record the Tokyo Jazz Festival, and I spent a few weeks in Japan. Same thing with the Montreux Jazz Festival, and I took a trip through Europe at that time. And also, I'll be honest with you, on a summer night with all the windows down and the radio blaring, back in the day of AM Top 40, driving across the bridge, coming into San Francisco, coming home, and my record's playing on the Top 40 rotation. That's smelling the roses.
Oh man, that's living right in the moment too.
It really was. It was really exciting. It was a whole heck of a lot of fun. You wanted to scream out at everybody, "Hey, that's my record!" But those kind of times were a lot of fun. And then, seeing the success of a lot of the projects that I did, and people coming up, and like you said, okay, you wore that record out. I mean, people came up to me and said, we had 3 children because of this particular record.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those kinds of things really, make you realize how much of an effect this has on other people. Because once you let it go, it's out of your hands. And you don't know what life it has on its own until somebody comes back and tells you. And
well, yeah, that's what Garcia said about, people would say, does it bother you that people record your shows? And he goes, once the notes leave my fingers, it's of little use to me, but it's kind of like you don't realize Jim, part of it is also, it doesn't take I don't let my daughters, they listen to other music, but we only listen to vinyl. I mean, you can't listen to this truncated, squished together, compacted music. Whatever, you don't hear anything. So you listen.
Well, they're pressing vinyl again.
What does that mean, though? I mean,
it'll never be what it was.
And the other thing is that really the truth is that it comes down to the fact, like, can you give an example of like of fixing the band? When you say Van, if Van's great and I can fix the band, how would you be able to fix the band?
Well, say the bass player screwed up. I can go back and put another bass line on, or do a little razor blade cutting. Maybe I just replace a whole section. Nowadays, with the digital world, you can do all kinds of wonderful things. I mean, you can fix anything now. In those days, you couldn't really fix a lot of things. There were some things you just had to live with. An example might be, let's see, Gary Bartz. Gary Bartz, Fantasy had a fantasy night at the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1973, I think it was, or 72. Yes. And they brought the tapes back for me to mix. And the Gary Bartz tapes, there was PA feedback all over this thing. Oh. And it was just obnoxious. Well, we couldn't do much. And what I did was, I mixed it down, so it was a little 1/4-inch stereo tapes, and I took out micro pieces, little pieces. I must have taken 100 of them, little slices, a little here, a little there, just took the little peak of the feedback out, leave a little bit there, take this out. I just futzed with it because they were playing, so if you take out too much of it, the time shifts, and now the time's uneven, and they're coming in on a half beat instead of a whole beat. So I was able to get most of the PA feedback out without anybody noticing. It took me a long time to do it, and it was a lot of work.
Are you kidding? I mean, dude, I just from listening, the Rhythm Cats on that was Stafford James and Hubert Eves. Yeah. I know that double album. It sounds magical. There's not...
Well, a lot of work to make that happen.
Wow.
And that's why they said next year you're going to record it. So the following year, I went and recorded everything at Montreux. And I was never so disappointed in my life as I was in the Swiss. They sabotaged me everywhere they could. They were incensed that an American was brought in.
Yes.
So they just did everything they could to sabotage me. I was just furious.
But you recorded Sonny Rollins there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That Cutting Edge album with Mtume on congas. That's this stuff that you've. I mean, yeah, I can't speak for people being insecure. That is what it is. But the truth is that the warmth of the sound of the records cannot be replicated. Did you feel that? I don't know how to say this. Like. Who were your partners in crime there, in the sense of like other guys that you could trust? I mean, I see other cats' names show up, but who else worked with you there at that time?
What do you mean, engineering-wise?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have a lot of great engineers there. I had a lot of friends around the country, but the guys that worked for me, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Who were you close with around the country?
Well, see, the thing was, I never imitated anybody, and I never discussed much with anybody. We all just kind of did our own thing. And there was no schools in those days. And when I started, if you wanted to learn, you had to go to a major label because there were no real independent studios. There were only three of them in the whole United States. Just a few here and there, and they were real small nothings. If you wanted a real recording thing, you had to go to a label, RCA, CBS, A&M.
Sure. Right.
Because we had the keys to the kingdom. Well, the thing is, I have gifts. God gave me gifts, and one of the gifts that I was given was an amazing set of ears. When I first, I was doing some sessions. I forget who it was, who the producer was, and I was the drummer on the session. This was early on. I think it was at Pacific High Recording, and the engineer didn't show up. And so the producer says, "Hey Jim, come on, can you help me?" I said, "What am I going to do?" He said, "Well, I'm paying you guys, and even if I don't use it, at least we're doing something."
Right.
So I said, okay. So I went and I got microphones I had seen used that I thought I liked the sound of, and I had somebody move them around the drum so that they sounded where I wanted. I just got everything to sound the way I wanted it to. I made it sound good to my ear, and the next thing I know, they fired the guy, and I was the engineer because it was a gift. I don't know how I know.
Right. No, I'm with you, man. It's a natural thing. You can't explain this stuff. It's not explainable in words. It's just, and the nice thing is, because there are a lot of people that are talented and they can't get it out of their system. I mean, you were able to do it in a prolific way with cats that clearly to me, I mean, I'm sure there were some dudes that had their own points of view, but I really feel like, the artists, they could focus on the music. You hear about people today, we can put out an album and we can make the music and produce it and do it all ourselves, and it's like, this is wrong. You have to delineate responsibility to those who have those gifts. And I think that's what was so magical about that time. In any of those pockets in the country, any of those record labels that I brought up before, was that you really had these prolific groups of people that worked together to make the music what it was.
And I was very, very fortunate that most of the artists that I worked with realized right away that I had a gift and that my ears were right on, that I knew what I was doing, and they trusted me. I mean, Van Morrison would cut a basic track and leave.
Right.
And I'd finish everything. If I'm going to put something down, I'd overdub. I'd make all the decisions. I'd do everything myself. He'd call me up on the phone. "What are you doing?" "I'm putting some bagpipes on this." "Oh, great. Send me a copy." Joe McDonald. Joe cut the basics and left. He says, "Let me know when my album's done." Cannonball Adderley, McCoy Tyner, all these people, they let me put myself into it. They let me do my thing. They didn't try to control me. They didn't try to boss me around. They let me go. They put me on the project and let me run. Just let him go. And boy, what a blessing that is. Because there were some producers I've worked with over the years where, they controlled everything you did. They wanted to make sure you didn't breathe without them telling you to. And, you don't need somebody like me for that, because anybody can take orders and do exactly what you tell them. But somebody like myself, you want to let them go and put themselves into it. So I was very fortunate that I was allowed to do that.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think. What Bola Sette album? Again, you've made mention before. It's hard to remember all this stuff.
Well, I did two of them. The first one I did was Shababa.
That is the one. That is an amazing album. Go ahead. Tell me about that album.
Oh, that was great. I loved Bola. Bola and I became really close on that album. That was his working band, and we sat down and we went over the material, and I produced the album and engineered it, and then the second one that I did was a solo album, which he bought back from Fantasy, and it came out. He made a deal with Tacoma Records, John Fahey, and it came out on Tacoma Records, and I heard it, and it sounded just terrible, and I had recorded it 30 IPS Dolby,
yes.
2-track. It was spectacular. It was beautiful and quiet, and oh my God. And it came out, and the record sounded like it had been recorded through a sheet. So I don't know what happened. I let it go. Years later, I got a phone call from, I forget his name. He had bought a recording studio, Different Fur, and they had gotten that album, and they were going to reduce reissue it.
Sure.
And he said, we found their masters and all, but then there's these other masters that said 30 IPS Dolby and has your name all over it, and it says masters, and they sound wonderful. I told them the story, and apparently when they reissued it, they used those Dolby masters, but I never got a copy of it, so I don't know.
That Shababa album.
Yeah, that was fun.
Very complex. I mean, fascinating dynamics. Because way back when I interviewed Ed Bogus, I guess you guys did quite a bit of work together.
Yeah, I worked with Ed a bunch.
Did you guys worked well together?
Well, Ed was an interesting guy.
Yeah.
He still is.
Yeah.
I don't. There's a lot of history back there. I don't. Ed's an interesting guy. That's all I can say.
No, it's fine. I don't want to poke around. Did you find that you were? Did you find were you involved with the Grace Cathedral album, the Jader album?
No, I wasn't.
When
that was before me.
No, I'm talking about it was a Giraldi was supposed to play on it, but he passed away, so Lonnie Hewitt played on it.
Yeah, that was I didn't do that one.
Were you still with Fantasy at that time?
No, I wasn't. That was early on, I believe.
No, because Giraldi.
Maybe that was.
No, that was later.
When was that? What year was
that was 76.
76?
Yeah. Well, think about it. I mean, Giraldi was still, I
might have been involved. I was involved as a consultant on a number of Cal's albums.
Yes.
But that I didn't actually engineer or produce.
Did you?
So I might have been involved. I don't really remember being involved with it, though.
Did you play with Lonnie Hewitt, though, back in the late 60s?
I didn't play with him, no.
Was he a part of? Can you talk a little bit about Ray Shanklin at all? Did you find him to be a fascinating character? Because I don't think there's enough light shed on that cat.
I like Ray. Ray was quite a guy. He was one of those guys. You'd find him out in the, with the brown wrap, leaning in the car, leaning on the center armrest, listening to the KDIA radio. So that was his office.
I love it.
But I liked Ray. He was a no BS guy. He knew his music. He knew what he was doing. We got along fine. I liked the guy a lot. We had a lot of fun. They kind of took me in. I was the kid. They kind of took me in, and I was the white kid. They kind of took me in, and
you were the white kid. No, but yeah, but those days what a magical time for you to be in that whole zone there. I mean, and then to play on these obscure I don't know if they ever were cut or not, but just if they ever were released or not. But it was. To me, it's like there's a lot of cats that they stopped playing, but you just got too busy to not play, right? I mean, you kept.
Well, I didn't stop. I just kind of curtailed my professional image. I still play piano, and I play some guitar, and I play some bass, but mostly drums professionally is what I play. And right now it's just. Now I only do what I want. I'm in my 70s. I'm retired. I only do what I want. If I don't want to do it, I don't do it. If I want to do it, I'll do it. I don't have to build any more castles. I don't have to climb any more mountains. I don't need any more awards. No more. I don't need pats on the back and accolades. I've got all that stuff. I've done it all. It's gag-a-maggot. I've left a lexicon that is really quite amazing. And so, I'm satisfied with all that. So now all I have to do is what I want. I don't have to go out and reach for anything at this point.
Well, I think we'll wrap up part one right there. Thank you, Jim, for spending some time and handling my questions, and I'll be in touch about setting up another time for another interview.
Okay, and I'd like to get a copy of it sometime if I could.
Well, no, what I want to do is I want to do a part two, and then I'll fuse it, and then I'll get it to you.
Great, that's great.
All right, and I really had a ball. It was wonderful to hear you. like I said, I mean, just about being links in the chain, and I totally understand what you're talking about. No, not so much. I mean, I know, like, it's out of the lexicon. You know, you just want to be yourself, and you just want to do your own thing. But just know that the warmth that went into these albums still holds true today, and it's helped me on my mission. You know, get to where because
I appreciate
you know, it's true.
Well, you know, it's funny because I've done something here a couple of times now in my life where I've looked back. I sat down one day and I started taking records that I had done from the different decades.
Right.
I went all the way back, and then I started coming forward in time just to see how my style had changed, how my sound had changed, how my approach to making records had changed. And you can hear the differences, you know, sort of like the Picasso blue period versus the green period. You can really see how my art has evolved over the last 50 years. And, you know, it's kind of been it's thrilling in a way.
I can relate to it, too, from my broadcasting, although listening to some of my early stuff, sometimes I'm amazed with the spasticity, and sometimes I'm just cringing because of it. But to me, it's like the evolution that's the trip, you know.
Well, it is. It's just, you know, I feel just so fortunate, so blessed. This little white Jewish kid from San Francisco got stuck in the middle of all this. I don't know how, but you know, I've been very blessed to have an amazing career.
I do. You know, I'll tell you, I would like to focus on more your growing up in San Francisco and your experiences musically in part two as well.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, Jim, and have a beautiful night. I'll give you a call next day or so.
Thank you, Jake. Take care.
Take care, brother.
All right, bye. Bye.
Welcome back to part two of my interview with Jim Stern, who kind of blew my mind. I listened back to the interview and just the idea of a premier engineer and also a guy who could still play. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be back, Jake.
Can you tell me? You mentioned that Fantasy or Saul Zaentz, or they sent you off to Memphis to make sure that it was the real thing. What did you mean by the real thing?
Well, you know, they were talking. Pardon me. They were talking the business end of things, but they didn't really know what was really there. You know, where it was just a warehouse with some stuff in it. So I went back and made sure that all the tapes were there. We had all the multi-tracks and the stereo masters. So I had to make sure that, you know, what we were purchasing was what it was purported to be. And so I hired the engineers. I researched and found the engineers that had done the original work, and they were both working at Ardent at the time. And I forgot their names, Robert something and Valley, I just don't remember. And so I hired them and booked some time at Ardent, and we brought in a lot of the different tapes, and I went through them to make sure that they were viable and that they were what they were, and they were. And so I gave the okie dokie sign, and they went ahead and purchased the Stax Volt labels.
Did you get a chance to hang with Al Jackson down? When did you ever meet him?
No, this was not the active Stax record company. They were gone. This was just the label and the tapes. This was a warehouse full of stuff.
Yeah.
There was no studio, no musicians, nothing. Everything had been recorded and released, most of it. And this was just all the stuff that was going to be re-released in a more modern, context.
Who were the cats? Because I mean, who were the cats that you brought in to play the Steve Cropper? Like, who were the go-to guys for that?
I got to be honest with you, I really don't remember because it was a lot of local guys that weren't well-known names, but were good musicians and could do the work.
Yeah.
So there's no credits on it, like the Pinch album, the Albert King album. There's no credits on there, and I don't think there was any credits on there originally anyway. But none of us got credited, and we were anonymous. You weren't supposed to know we were there.
What? Yeah. Well, what does that speak?
The parts that we were playing were the original parts, and we didn't vary from that at all. In fact, the whole impetus was to get it exactly right, just a different sound, because the sound, they wanted a more modern sound because things had changed a lot. So that's all we did, is just replace, like, for example, the snare and hi-hat and toms were fine. It was just the bass drum couldn't get that right pop out of the bass drum. So that's all I replaced, was the bass drum. And if you played it right, you never knew, because I was right on perfectly with every note he played. So all I did was replace his part with his part in a more modern sound, and that's what everybody did. So there was an anonymous factor involved.
Would the cats that came in, would they get paid for studio? How would they get? Would they get reimbursed?
Yeah, they got paid regular studio session pay.
Right. Can you talk a little bit more about the sound changing between Pinch? Is that what, the album you talked about, the older sound and bringing it more up to speed? Was it just the rhythm, or was it also like the Fender Rhodes and the type of bass or that kind of stuff?
I think most of it was different on every tape. Some things they were able to make them sound perfect and everything was fine, and others they had to replace various parts. I don't think it was the same on everything as I remember it. It was quite different on various tunes. Wow.
How many albums would you say that you did that on?
Well, let's see. I know it was the Pinch. I think there was at least one Emotions album I think that it was done on, and possibly I'm not sure. I don't think they did anything on any of the Otis stuff.
Wow, interesting.
I think that was all. It was all just stereo masters that was just remastered. That's all. We tried. The whole purpose wasn't to affect anything. We weren't trying to make it. Hey, let's tweak this up. We just wanted to make it clear and modern, so it sounded good, sounded original and good, and that you wouldn't notice any change. We didn't want people to say, "Oh, wow, they redid that." We didn't want that at all. We just wanted it to sound right.
Wow. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, for the audience, I think it's important. You grew up in Haight-Ashbury, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how San Francisco came, not before the invasion of these people that, like you said, were looking for something. I don't know what they were looking for, but how did it get to that point? I mean, Marin County, for instance, was not the Marin County that we know today. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how everything got to be.
Sure. Well, my cousin was a big honcho in the union, in the musicians' union, and I first started playing piano and then switched to drums, and when I was 16, he said, well, if you're going to be a musician, you're going to be in the union. So I joined the union, and I ended up playing in a country and western band, actually. A bunch of Hispanic guys in their 30s had this country and western band, and I played Boom Chicka for a while, made good money on the weekends, made a lot more money than my friends made throwing newspapers.
Sure.
But in those days, most of the music in San Francisco was either the commercial music of the hotels and some of the dance halls and the clubs. There was a whole big club scene where people on Friday and Saturday nights would go out and drink and dance, and it was top 40. It was all cover tune top 40 bands. Most of it was not original. People wanted to hear the songs that they've been hearing on the radio, and get drunk and dance and party and meet each other and go home. And that was all over San Francisco and the Bay Area. There was a whole plethora of clubs like that. And in 1960, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6, somewhere, maybe even before that, maybe even 64. I can't remember exactly what year. There was an FM station in San Francisco that was just sort of catch as catch can. Anybody could buy some time. So there was a Chinese hour, and there was a Filipino hour, and there was an hour of power, and there was another hour of this. People
Sure.
bought whatever time. And the midnight to 6 a.m. slot was empty. And there was a guy going to State College who decided that he could earn his way by buying that time. So he bought the midnight to 6 a.m. slot, and he would sell advertising and so forth, and he would play music while he studied. So everybody was playing singles, or maybe an album cut, but that was about it. He played the whole album, and he was playing stuff that we'd never heard. He was playing stuff like was it Powerhouse with Clapton, the first band, and he was playing all this English stuff that we didn't know about, and some of the more obscure stuff from here. And he put on the album, and he played the whole side while he studied. And then sometimes he just flipped the side turner without even IDing, because it was the middle of the night, nobody cared.
It wasn't Sly Stone. It was, who was it?
Oh no, this is before all of that. This was before the big.
Okay, so but what was this cat's name? Does he ever get recognized?
His name was. Oh wait a minute. It was Larry Miller. I think it was Larry Miller.
Okay, so Larry Miller broke the mold and decided to go 12.
Well, he wasn't breaking a mold. He didn't know what he was doing. He was just making some money going to state college. So finally, there was an AM disc jockey, top 40, big guy in the Bay Area named Tom Donahue.
Yes, I know that.
And Tom had been on KYA and a couple other stations, and he, with Abe Kesh, who was called Vaco, and a couple other people, took over the station. As Larry was phasing out, they took it over, and they were the ones that started the FM format. They were the ones that disc jockeyed it and played different cuts and talked about it and really made album music popular. And that was the first real FM station that I know of. I mean, it really, really happened, and it made that really work. And so KMPX was sold. And they went over and took over another station that was just sort of sitting there with nothing happening called KSAN. And that was the next step of FM music. KSAN became very big and very popular, and it spread across all over the place. It might have been happening in other places in the States at the same time. I don't know. I was here, and that was what was happening here.
Right.
So that changed the sound, and a lot of us, we wanted to stop playing top 40. We wanted to play this album music stuff. We wanted to play original stuff. And so people like myself, I put together a band, saved some money, put together a band of guys, and we rented a house down the coast, and we just woodshedded and wrote tunes and put together this whole thing. And that started that whole movement for me. And that was and it was really interesting because we were supposed to come out at, I don't know if you know who Neil Cassidy was.
Yeah.
You know who Neil was?
I would love you to tell me about him. I mean, all I know is I know about Cowboy Neil.
Neil was Jack Kerouac's buddy on the road.
Right.
And he's all over the Kerouac stuff. And he was Ken Kesey's bus driver. He was the guy who drove the Magic Bus. And
right.
Neil was a character. Well, Neil was found dead on the beach in Mexico. So the family decided to have a wake for Neil at Limekiln Creek down the coast of California. And it's just a campground up in there. And we didn't know. We thought we'd have a couple hundred people maybe. We had no idea how big it was getting. There was 10,000 people showed up. And we had no food. We didn't have anything. We didn't know there was going to be that many people. Well, my band was supposed to come out at that event. So we're there all week, and everybody's doing the things they do in the world of psychedelia in those days for a number of days. And when it came time for the big show, and my band is going to come out, the bass player and the keyboard player and the singer freaked out and split. They left.
They couldn't. They couldn't
handle it. They left. They freaked out and left. So Jerry and I don't know who else, maybe Bobby and a couple other people said, "Come on, Jim, we'll play with you." So we jammed a set. It wasn't.
That's so. What a great story. Those cats picked you up, man. They picked you up.
That was really. That was where the whole part of my life started. It got me away from that whole San Francisco club scene. It got me into writing music and being involved in what became the San Francisco sound. I don't think we were planning a San Francisco sound. Most of the people that I knew, they were going to college. Like all of the Jefferson Airplane, they all met State College. What's his name?
Yorma.
they were all going. They were over there. That's where they met, and they were playing folk music, and Marty Dallin was playing. They were all playing folk music at that time, and really they started out. It was that era where the Bob Dylan was moving from folk to electric,
yes.
and everybody was kind of moving from that direction, from folk to electric. There was a big backroar about it, and the folk scene, they didn't like it, and but it became very popular in the electric scene, so it all switched over. But that was the genesis for me, and then of course it went on from there. But
this is no, you really wait. Hold on for a second. Was your band playing? Were you going rogue and playing electric music?
Oh no. Nobody was going rogue. It was just a natural progression. You know, the guys, they were playing, you know, acoustic folk music and all, and just switched, you know, got an electric guitar and started playing electric music.
No, I guess what I'm saying is the band where the three dudes freaked out on acid and ran off the stage.
Oh, we were playing electric. We were all electric.
All electric. So, yeah, because I've done a lot of. I mean, I've interviewed Harvey Brooks and guys that were on stage at.
No, that was all electric.
Right. So, but there wasn't. Were you witness to this backlash of electric when people plugged in, or was that more?
I was witness to it because it happened really before my scene that we were just talking about. It happened more in the earlier '60s. You know, when people like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Weavers, and Bob Dylan, and all those people. Well, Dylan was the first one to do it. Dylan put together a show with it was David Bromberg and
Mike Bloomfield, Al Cooper,
and Al Cooper, and all those guys.
Harvey Brooks, yeah,
and Harvey Brooks and all, and the folks went crazy, and the folk scene, they were furious because he had betrayed them, and he'd gone electric, you know, and that was the first real backlash. The other people there were a lot of people who never came out of the acoustic scene. They just were electric from beginning on in, and you know that was all the Chuck Berrys and the Bill Haleys and all that part of rock and roll. That was all electric, and that happened in conjunction with folk music, but it was a separate genre, and so the acoustic scene felt betrayed that Bob Dylan had moved genres into rock and roll, and how dare he? It was a bad word in those days, rock and roll. You know?
Right, and how much of a role did the drums play? I mean, I feel like, yeah, he plugged in, but I mean, I remember Gordon Lightfoot talking about, like, being at the bitter end and having a trap set for the first time. I mean, it was like kind of like, I feel the drums also lent itself to that as well.
Well, of course, because it puts a beat in there. I remember there was a club in Mill Valley, and there was a group it was called the Fletcher Brothers. Everybody was a Fletcher brother. Nobody was a Fletcher brother, but everybody was a Fletcher brother. And I was Sterno Fletcher. And, you know, every now and then when their drummer, Fuzzy, couldn't make a gig or whatever, they'd ask, you know, they'd call me and I'd sub in. So they called me one night to play at the Sweetwater, the original Sweetwater.
Sure.
And they didn't allow drums. I said, they didn't allow drums in there. They said, yeah, I know, just don't say anything. You know? I said, well, oh, man, I don't want to go through that. Oh, you know, come on, dude, it'll be okay. You know, we can't do it without drums. Just don't say anything. And when I rolled the trap case in, oh, you should have seen the looks I got. Oh, and then there was a big scene, and they all went and chewed it over, and they said, well, okay, we'll try it. And they made so much money at the bar that was the end of that. Drums were allowed. You know, so...
Wow. You were the first one to was you the first?
As far as I know, I was the first drummer ever to play at the Sweetwater. Yeah,
that's unbelievable. I mean, that is and then so, but
you know, it's money. It comes down to economics.
Yeah.
You know, you may have these high moral views of purist music.
Yeah,
you're not going to allow drums.
Right.
You're only going to, you know, but. You know, when it comes down to it, people want to party, and if they start spending money with drums, you're going to keep drums, and you're going to do what brings the money in the door, and that's how it progresses. You know.
You know, so like you know, Kerouac, obviously, you know, he gets a lot of the headlines. That, you know, Cassidy was his driver. You know,
well, no, Cassidy was his buddy.
Cassidy was his buddy, and Kesey
was Kesey's driver.
Okay, so when was Kesey picked up on the? I thought Kesey was from Oregon, though.
He was, but the scene changed. You know, Kerouac and on the road. That was the 50s.
Right. You're right. No,
that was a little different scene, and it morphed, and he ended up hanging out with Kesey, and I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the psychedelic world, and or whatever. I'm not sure how they got. I wasn't around when they got together, so I don't know how they met or got together. But he ended up as part of that scene because that was the morph of the scene. The beatnik scene that he was involved in North Beach, San Francisco. That was my sister's scene. You know, that just sort of disappeared. It was the beat scene, and the beat was like beaten down. I mean, they were all dark. It was like black turtlenecks or burgundy turtlenecks and sandals and berets and lots of wine and some pop, but mostly wine and poetry and jazz and a real down attitude, you know. And then the psychedelic scene came along, which was the scene that I'm more about. And we were all about, hey, man, sex and love. Isn't everything wonderful?
Well, I think it's so much deeper. I mean, no, I know you know it's deeper than that because it's like the mind, the consciousness expansion, like the overwhelming amount of creativity that came out of music. I'm not sure what was going on in other cross sections of society, but I mean, there was this. It just your generation, that group, that pocket is just the open-mindedness and the freedom and the I mean the street learning. You guys were not. There was no academia for music. It was all learned on the street. There was
most of it was. It's true, but you know there was some academia. You know, you're talking about one part of the scene, but you mentioned the Harvey Brooks and those guys, the Electric Flag, and at the same time there was a very good friend of mine, Fred Lipsius, had put together a band and wrote the hits for Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Oh, wow.
And they were living in Mill Valley, and there were a number of other bands like that. They were all college grads. They were all music people, and they knew music and they'd studied music, and they were horn bands, so they had some pretty interesting voicings and charts, and it was they were all accomplished musicians, and yet there was Blue Cheer, which was the Peterson brothers, and they just played screaming 2-note 3 chords, and that was it.
Right.
So there was a little bit of everything. It just depended on. And it was all happening simultaneously. It was a
right.
concurrent event, if you will. And so there wasn't any one stream that held the line for a while. There were a whole bunch of lines at the same time.
It's so beautiful, like, because, I think Greg Arico told me, he said it was like San Francisco was this perfect nest that was just waiting to give, waiting to get to explode. And this is what you're describing exactly, is that it just...
Well, it was always a music town.
Right.
One of the things people don't realize is we were one of the biggest jazz centers.
I know.
We had a number of world-renowned jazz clubs in San Francisco, and all the top jazz players in the world came here and played here on a regular basis, and there was an amazing audience for that. And there was a big dance contingent of people. There were dance halls here that in the 40s and 50s and 60s where people went and danced to big bands and later on to the rock and roll sounds, and then it became it just morphed into the whole Fillmore, Avalon, ballroom kind of thing. But originally there was a lot of music in this town. And there still is a lot of music in this town. There's a plethora of young, hot, schooled musicians working in this area. And in fact, I just got a call tonight. I was at this gig, and I got a call for a gig tomorrow night. And I'm playing at, ironically, I'm playing at Phil Lesch's club, Terrapin Station, tomorrow night.
Oh, that is awesome.
And it's a jazz gig, and they're all 20-something. I mean, I'm more than 3 times their age. And I'm going to go play with these kids, but they're doing it, man, and they sound great. And they've all gone to school, and they've all graduated, and they're all okay, and they know what they're doing on their instruments, and they're loving this music, and I'm amazed. It's just the resurgence of great talent in the Bay Area is alive and well.
But let's also say, I mean, I haven't been to Terrapin Station, but I mean, the days of the bongos and bagels and the $60 7-day-a-week gigs in the cafes, those are gone.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you talk to any cat out there, and even around through like 1990, they would still be filling up the calendar. And over the last 20 years or so, I mean, they're lucky if they get 5 gigs a month. I'm not saying there isn't amazing talent out there. It's just the opportunities that you had to just be able to play the clubs. Bill Vitt, the drummer, he told me, he's like, Mothers Against Drunk Driving had a lot to do with shutting the clubs down. Because it used to, I mean, back in your day, you'd be going home to go to sleep. People would be going to church the next day.
Well, I mean, they were pretty lenient in those days because everybody was coming out of those clubs and they'd been drinking and everybody knew it. And unless you were being really stupid, nobody really, I mean, it was just too much for the cops to do much about, so they had to deal with the egregious cases. But I don't know if that's really, I don't know if that's all of it.
Right.
I can't really
It isn't all of it. It's just part of it.
Because, what really happened is the change in generations. I have friends, I was talking to a friend of mine, in fact, the other night. This guy, his band works all the time. And the last 2 years, all these musicians that I know, none of them have had a New Year's gig. Not one of them. Out of about 10 guys, not one of them had a New Year's gig. Everybody had New Year's gigs for years. It was the biggest gig of the year. I don't know. Even I had New Year's gigs. And, and I had been out of it. I kept getting calls. Hey, man, you want to play in on New Year's? And it was $300. Yeah, okay, I'll play. But they don't have those gigs anymore. And this other guy's got a pretty well-known band, and they just aren't working that much. So
how do you? What's that? What does that mean? What does that mean to you? I mean,
what it means is that it's changed. It's gone to the bigger venues.
Right.
It's gone to the progression seems to be the small clubs, the little local thing, then the smaller clubs, then the bigger clubs, and then you get to play an opening act for somebody big, and then you get to be the big guy, and then after a while you become the opening act again, and then you end up playing the Indian casinos.
Right.
I mean, or just the regular casinos anywhere, and you can see it if you look at the casinos. Look at the names of who's playing the casinos. It's the guys that were the hits 20 and 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Believe me, I've been pulling them in to interview all of them. People like Charlie Daniels, all these cats that were. You're right. You broke it down from a business.
But it's great because they have a place to play. It's just like, what did you do after 50 in golf? And then they came up. Arnold Palmer came up with the senior tour, and now these guys can play. They've got a whole thing going on. It's a resurgence of their whole career, and they've got something.
It's true. Great. No, it is. I mean, but again, when it's like you said, when that was happening simultaneously. You were having a ball, but I mean, like right now, everything's happening simultaneously, but and their careers are still thriving. But there was something a bit magical about that period, and I wanted to go back for a minute. I was curious. You mentioned a guy, Pivotal. Maybe you could fill in the gaps because I have this double album on Blue Thumb, but I know he was an instrumental cat. It was Vaco, the radio cat. Did you know him?
Oh, Abe Cash.
Abe Cash, exactly.
Yeah,
he did.
I met him a few times. We didn't really hang up. We weren't, good buddies. Tom Donahue, I knew better.
Talk about Donahue specifically. Then, I mean, what were some of those? As a broadcaster, what did he bring to the table that really was just therapeutic for that time?
I don't know if it was therapeutic as much as he was a pretty smart guy, and he was a radio guy. He understood radio. He had a good voice, and pardon me, he was a strong character, and that's sometimes what it takes.
The other, that's more. You actually brought up the right point. Whether it was Bromberg or Garcia, Weir, yourself, why did all the seemingly geniuses decide to congregate in one area in Mill Valley? A lot.
No, it didn't. It wasn't that they congregated in one area. We were all city people.
Right.
Well, when all these people showed up in 1966 or 7 or whatever it was, it became impossible. It was just everything was crazy. And so Marin County was quiet and peaceful. Marin, when I was a little boy, my aunt and uncle lived in San Rafael. And so we would go over there all the time. There was nothing. It was a bedroom community.
Right.
And there was very little of anything between the Golden Gate Bridge and San Rafael. There were all these little towns. There was Larkspur and Corte Madera and all these little towns and nothing in between them, and it was just blank out to the bay and all that. It's all filled in now. It's all, you can't tell from, it's like city all the way up from San Francisco, and it's built out all the way to the bay, and everything's built up now, and everything is happening now. But in those days, it was just a bedroom community. There was no industry or anything. Nobody had much of a business in some local stores and that, but there wasn't a lot of industry or anything in Marin County. It was a bedroom community. So you lived in Marin County and you worked in the city. And Mill Valley is the closest. There's Sausalito and Mill Valley. They're kind of contiguous, and those are the closest to the city. They're right on the north end of the Golden Gate Bridge. So that became the place that a lot of people moved because they could live there. It was quiet and peaceful and beautiful, and they wouldn't be bothered, and they could walk down the street, and it was no big thing, and then they could pop into the city. So, like, the dead kept the house on Ashbury, the airplane kept the house on Fulton Street, but they didn't live there anymore. They moved to Marin. The house was sort of the center of the business. That's where everybody hung out and everything took place, and they had the rehearsal space there and everything. But they didn't live there anymore, and everybody kind of moved north. That was just the way it was. I went to Big Sur. I went south.
You went south. Why did you go south?
Well, it just happened that way. I went down for the weekend and spent a year there. It was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Right. Can you talk about? But
then when I came back, I did go to Marin. I got to admit.
Yeah. Okay. Because today, I haven't been to Marin, I know today it's like, $8 million estates and all sorts of stuff like that. But I've talked to cats. Can you try to, for the audience, describe how classic it was and how unpretentious it was? And
Marin?
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand, it's a county. Marin is a county, so there's various cities within the county.
Yeah, right.
So there's Marin City, which is the project, and so that's one level of economic life. Then there's Ross, which is gazillion-dollar estates, the CEO of Xerox, all those, totally different world.
Wow.
It's all part of Marin.
Wow.
And there's everything in between. There's middle class, there's inexpensive, no, not too inexpensive, but there is inexpensive housing in Marin, and there's a lot of high-end housing in Marin. It's not a cheap county. It is an expensive county. There's no doubt about it. And it has the lowest unemployment rate in Northern California, probably in California for all I know. It's like 5% or something.
Why is
because most people, it's the place everybody wants to be, and so the jobs gobble up quickly. The hospitals in Marin are full of great doctors. They want to live in Marin. It's a wonderful place to live. It's beautiful. The weather's great. It's just there's some exquisitely beautiful places in Marin. Some of them are not really that expensive. But I'll give you an example. I bought 2 units in a half an acre in Fairfax, which is West Marin, in 70, 71, something like that, for $21,000.
Right.
I sold it in 1979 for $60,000. Yesterday, I was just curious for some reason about a property thing, and it just dawned on me, I wonder what that's worth today. So I looked it up on Zillow.
Yes.
$757,000.
Yeah.
And it's just it's nothing, it's an old, it still needs a lot of work, but it's in Marin. And everything in Marin is very expensive. It's the same thing with San Francisco. The median house price in San Francisco Francisco today, not even the median, to buy a house in San Francisco today, it's $1 million. And that's a small house.
Yeah, no, this is, these...
It's crazy, but
yeah, it seems...
It's what happens. People want to be here. And so, you have things like Lucas. Lucas settles in Marin, builds this incredible facility out in the middle of nowhere where it's beautiful and sets it up like paradise and has a restaurant and a place for people and they just can't wait to go work there. They're scrambling to work there. and so there's that kind of thing has gone on.
But they have to live in Marin City though. They can't. I mean, where do they get?
Well, no, he pays pretty well. They don't have to live in Marin City. They can live in Marin. You don't have to be a gazillionaire to live in Marin. You do to live in certain parts.
Sure, I like the way you broke that down. That's absolutely.
If you want to live on Belvedere Island, give me an example. Belvedere Island. Just recently, a friend of mine is a construction dude, and he's a contractor, and he contracted on this house. They bought a house, nice house, $2.5 million. Nothing big. Tore it down, leveled the place, and built a $5 million house or whatever. That's what they do,
Yeah.
And that's what it is. You can't live on Belvedere Island without a lot of money. You can't live in Tiburon without a lot of money. You're not going to live in Ross unless you're a gazillionaire. So, right next door to Ross is a town that you can live in. So, it's just the way it is. Probably in most of the places in the country, you'll find, in one county, you'll find high-end towns and low-end towns, and the wealthy live in one section and the poor live in the other section. And everybody else lives in between.
Yeah, no, it's you're absolutely right. Can you talk about the evolution? Did you ever have it? When was the first time you were inside Wally Heider's studios? Did you ever do any engineering there?
Yeah, I did a lot of work at Wally's.
Can you talk about how that came? Because there's mystique there as well. I mean, especially for a cat for younger generations. So go ahead.
Well, there weren't many recording studios in San Francisco. There was only a couple, and they weren't very good. And they certainly weren't hip to what was happening with the newer sound, with rock and roll, and with all of what we were doing. They were more from the old commercial side of things, and there were 4 tracks. Maybe they had gotten an 8-track, but they didn't have much, and they didn't have any understanding. The rooms weren't that great, and it just wasn't happening. And Wally came up and built the Hyde Street Studios, and that was it, man. It was the first guy who brought a professional studio, really a top-notch professional studio, into San Francisco, and we all worked there. That was the place to work. And then the record plant came in. Those guys, what's his name, Chris Stone and Gary Kelger and all, they came in and built the record plant in Sausalito, and we built Fantasy. Was all around the same period. So in the early days of, and in fact, when I first started with Fantasy, before we built the new studios and all, when we just had this funky little place in West Oakland, we couldn't mix anything there. We didn't have the facility. We mixed everything at Hyder.
Wow.
So I'd cut tracks in the Fantasy studio and then take them over to Hyder to mix them, because we couldn't mix them. We didn't have a board or anything. So that was a big boon to us when Hyder came in. And, Wally and I had our fallings out. He avoided me for a while. I wanted to kill him, but
yeah,
he was a tough guy, Wally. And then when I was running Camden Artisan, I stole some of his people.
The record plant cats. What kind in Sausalito? What kind of music? I thought Fantasy was the only game in town. What kind of music were they doing?
No. Well, the record plant?
That was
the rock and roll
label.
haven.
Yeah, okay.
That was where I did a bunch of Van Morrison albums there. Sly Stone had his own studio there and a bedroom and everything.
Okay.
Let's see. All the hot rock guys, because they had a couple of houses up on the hill there in Sausalito. So you'd stay at the house in Sausalito and work in the studio, and then there was there was the Trident and a couple of other hot restaurants in town and all, where people would hang out. And so there was this whole it was like a very LA-ish scene. that took place there in Sausalito, and that's why all the rock guys loved it, because it was just, made for them,
I was trying to, so that's okay, I was like Verdant Fleece, like, which is just an amazing album. Thank you. I'll never get that correct. But that was done at the record plant. That was done.
No, it wasn't.
Where was that done?
That was done at Van's studio at his house. That became my studio. When he sold the house and I put all that stuff in storage, he called me up one day. He said, "Let's go have dinner." At dinner, he says, all that studio stuff? I said, "Yeah, what'd you ever do with that?" He said, "Oh, it's all in storage." I said, "Really?" He says, "Well, it's yours. I don't want it." I said, "Well, what am I going to do with it? I'm in the studio all day." He said, "I don't know. You bought it and built it, and you take it, because I don't want anything to do with it. Here's the ticket. It's all yours." So I set up a studio here at my house, which I never really intended to do, but it was recorded on that equipment. It was an MCI console, Ampex tape recorder, and it was recorded there, and it was mixed at Columbia at CBS, which became the Automat, David Rubinson's place. But originally it was CBS, and that's where I mixed it.
Wow.
Dan came to the first mix for an hour and left. That's the last. He never came to another mix again. That's the last time I ever saw him at any of my mix. I mixed everything by myself. He never came.
Yeah, he wasn't worried about it.
No, because he knew I was fussier than he was. He'd say, "Oh, that's great." I'd say, "No, it's not. Go home."
Wow, that's
I loved his music. I still love his music.
Yeah.
And you can say what you want about Van. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of things to say, but I'll tell you, he's never been anything but wonderful to me. He's never been anything but a friend to me. He never fratzed on me. He never screamed and yelled at me as I saw him do to other people. He never, even when I didn't come along, he wanted me to quit fantasy and go to work for him, and I didn't do it. And he got a little. He just walked away for a while, and I just left him alone. But one day I was driving down to get some dinner in San Rafael, and here he comes. He had a little green Volkswagen, and he pulls in front of me and stops. I said, "What are you doing?" And he gets out. And he comes over. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to have some dinner at Joe's." He says, "You mind if I come?" I said, "No, come on." And so we went. We had dinner, and I finally, because what he did was when I wouldn't do this thing, he just said, "Well, then I'll do it myself." And he hired some guys and went in another studio and spent a bunch of money and cut a bunch of tracks, which I think he used some of them a few years ago, but it just never was. So I finally just said, "Well, hey, how was that album you cut?" He says, "Terrible. You want to do the next one?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do the next one." So, that was all it was. He never fratzed anything on me. He just said, "Well, then, the hell with you. I'll go do it by myself." And he picked the wrong. It would have been okay, but he picked the wrong studio. The studio that he picked was a lousy sound, and it just never. You could never make it sound right. So that was probably a lot of the problem. I don't think the musicianship of the tunes or any of it was a problem. Because I think we cut a lot of it over again anyway. But I did cut a lot of his records at the record plant. I did.
What records did you cut over there for him?
Oh boy, I know I cut Beautiful Vision.
Yeah.
I cut No Guru, No Method, No Teacher.
Wow.
I cut. What else did I cut there? I cut a couple others there, I think. And I cut some European stuff that never came out here. There, I did. What was the one with Mark Knopfler? Cleaning windows. that was that on Beautiful? I'm not sure. It all kind of runs together after a while for me. A lot of people have a real organized mind about time and when and exact details about what they did and all, but I can't compartmentalize it like that. It just sort of all kind of flows together for me after a while.
I think that's to your benefit, man, because you don't dwell on things, and maybe I can tweak your memory a little bit here and there and get you a little amped up, but
yeah, you got me going.
No, I mean, this is heavy stuff, because how did you know? Well, when did you first come across Eddie Lee Charlton?
Lee Charlton? Wow, that's a name I wouldn't have expected from you. Brother Lee.
Brother Lee was the one that told me to... I don't know how... We were going through a couple names, like, he was going to put me in touch with, like, Ellis Marsalis, and I think he just brought up your name, and I was like, do you know where Jim's... He's the one that told me to look you up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Lee lived next door to me, or not next door, but just a few doors down from me in Fairfax. And I had known him in the music scene in San Francisco. I had met him a number of times in various other, gigs and such, and we knew a number of musicians in common, Mel Graves and Chuck Day and all those guys, and he lived a couple doors down, so we hung out a lot, and he had this band with Mose Allison and everybody's called the Gravity Adjusters Band, and Richard Waters had made all of these instruments. They were like a couple of stainless steel bowls with water in them that were welded together to form like a ball kind of thing.
The water phone. The water phone,
yeah. And then you'd have all these rods coming off of it, and you play with a bow, and then all these kinds. So you couldn't play any of your normal instruments. Everybody had to play something with the water phone or one of the water's instruments stuff. And it was just, we'd drink some wine and a couple of the things and just, have some fun and just play this crazy stuff all night long. It was a lot of fun.
The Gravity Adjusters, you were part of the Gravity
Expansion Band.
Well,
yeah, I wasn't. I never did any. I don't know if they did gigs. I never did any gigs with them or anything. But every now and then I'd go over there and.
Oh no, Jim! This was Jim. If you went over there to play, you were part of the group because I've done.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I mean, it was only a couple doors down, and we were all. And Jimmy Preston, the drummer from the Sons of Champlin, lived 2 doors down on the other side of me.
Did he really?
So, there were a lot of musicians in that area, and Terry Haggerty from the Sons lived a block away.
That's so. I just spoke to Terry actually. I can't believe you just brought. Also, did you know that cat Tom Donlinger?
Tommy?
Tommy.
Oh, God bless him. May he rest in peace.
I wish he was. He's one of these cats that the other cat that I tracked down that I would love to know any interactions you had with Howard Wales.
I know Howard very well.
Howard, I love, dude.
I've known Howard for, I don't know, since he came to California probably 45 years ago or more. Yeah, Howard and I go way, way back. Yeah, well, anyway, Tom was the drummer for Rotary Connection. Do you know that band?
Are you kidding me?
Do you know what Rotary Connection was?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Tom was the drummer for Rotary Connection. A great drummer. Tremendous, good drum teacher. And so I come in, what band, I don't remember what album it was. I'm gonna say Beautiful Vision, but it may not have been. It may have been one of the others.
Sure.
I get a phone call.
Wait, hold on. Yeah, okay. Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
So I get a phone call from David Hayes, bass player. Hey, can you have something about the studio? I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, the studio. I said, what do you mean? He said, didn't you listen to your message? I said, no, I got home late. I didn't even turn the box on. Well, we got a session today at 11 o'clock, whatever. I don't know, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I don't know. So I said, no, I didn't. Oh, okay. I was supposed to pick him up or something. So get to the studio, nobody knows what's going on. And Van's not there yet, so nobody knows what's happened. They're all asking me, because I'm supposed to know, and I don't know anything. And then people start showing up. Tommy Dollinger shows up. I said, Tom, what the hell are you doing here? He said, well, I'm on the date. I said, oh, have you played with Van before? Never played with Van before. Oh, okay. So David Hayes, the bass player, shows up. Chris Hayes, Huey Lewis's guitar player, he shows up. Never played with Van before. Who else? Oh God, I'm trying to think who the keyboard player was.
Was it Jeff Labus? Jeff Labus or something?
No, it wasn't Jeff. Jeff Labus is one of my dearest friends in life. I love this. We're very, very close friends.
Oh, I love that cat.
It was somebody else. I mean, Mark Jordan. I think it was Mark Jordan.
Right.
He had never played with him. And then Pauline Lozano, Andy Stocking, and Big Mama Bianca Thornton show up as background singers. They get in a fight in the bathroom. And it's like, oh boy. And then Mark Isham and Pee Wee Ellis show up. And then somebody else, I don't know. And and nobody knows what's going on. And then Dan shows up. And it's like, okay, so I've got the sound all together, and he shows up, and he goes in the room, and it's just a mess. Nothing could happen. He doesn't know what to tell them. They don't know what to do. So he comes back in, he sits down, he looks at me, he says, I guess I screwed it up, huh? I said, here, go home, come come in tomorrow at 3. Okay. So I had Tommy Doninger and David Hayes come in at 10. And I worked with them, because David knew how to play with Van, so I worked with Tom and had David help him out so he could, realize how to play with Van. And then I staggered in. I had Chris come in, and had the next one come in. I staggered them in about every hour.
Right.
And by the time Van got there, we were cooking, and we cut almost that whole album, probably at least a third to a half of that album that night.
That is.
And he came back in the control room and he said, "Wow, man, we cut all the material, and I still got a couple of days booked." I said, "Well, go home and write me some more." That's sort of a joke, but he went home and wrote 5 tunes. I mean, who does that? Who does that? He went home, he came in the next day with 5 tunes. Not 5 crummy tunes, 5 good tunes.
The confidence that is exhibited by him and yourself is just astounding. Like, for him to walk in after that first day, a lot of cats would be very worried. He wasn't worried at all.
No, he's never worried about that. He's a master. He is a world-class icon. He is more than people understand. He is a channel. Because I played gigs with him, and I'll tell you, I didn't play that good. I don't play that good. I play better than I can play. He has something. When you're in the band, there's a magic, there's an energy that he pulls in that is so strong that you lock right in with him. It's just like you can't get out of it. You're on 2 tracks and they're going down the road and you can't vary because you're so locked in. And it's amazing. It's just amazing. And that's why he's been so successful, because he gets musicians that get that. If you can't get that, you're not in the band. You may be able to play, but if you don't get that, you're not in the band, because you got to be able to feel him.
Lee Charlton sent me 2 original copies in shrink wrap of the Gravity Adjusters expansion band.
Oh wow! I don't even have one of those.
I'm gonna ship, because I mean, tell you, like, the cats that. Well, here's the funny thing that for you is, because with Lee, I mean, once Shelly Mann saw him playing this at one of these festivals in California. And Shelley was like, "I need to get my hands on these," and then all of a sudden, Emil Richards, and then so did you wind up seeing the waterphone used in Fantasy at a certain point?
I think we used one on something maybe, but it wasn't really the closest we got to anything like that was when I recorded the musical soundtrack for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nietzsche.
Yes,
and Jack wanted. For the theme music, he wanted a glass harmonica, and we couldn't find one. And so we decided we'll make one. And so we got several different size crystal water glasses, and we had a copyist write out a score from the score, write out a chart for each note. In the entire score, there were 17 notes. So each note had its own score. And so each note was recorded on its own track. And we would tune the wine glass to the right note, and then you'd start the tape, and it would go, and then you'd have to count 132 bars until the next time that note came in. So we were able to create a glass harmonica. And it's funny, when I went to mix it, there was all this horrible noise. And what it was Jack and I alternated. He'd do some and I did some. Well, Jack's stomach was growling the whole time that he was doing it. I had to go through and clean all that out. But anyway, and over the top of that, the lead was not a synthesizer. It was a bowed saw. So at the end of the movie, when the chief tears that water thing out of the floor and throws it through the glass window, as he's doing all that, you're hearing glass harmonica and you're hearing the bowed saw. When it hits the window, 93 pieces come in, the full orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And it's really powerful at that point. But, we used all acoustic. It was all acoustic stuff. It was, in a way similar to a waterphone, but it was actually within the context of the Western scale, because the waterphone was kind of like, kind of wherever it was. You know who Harry Partch Church was?
Oh, huge. Well, because Emil was one. I interviewed him, and he worshipped Harry for a long time. There's a great you weren't on any of his albums, were you?
No. Yeah. Harry was. I didn't know Harry, but I heard him a couple times. I attended some of his things, and it was like, wow.
Can you describe what was that? Where would he play? What kind of venue would he play?
I don't. Some hall somewhere. I don't remember where it was. It was quite a performance. In fact, I was kind of amazed. But he came up with all of his own instruments and all of his own tonal scales and everything. And it wasn't like happenstance. He really knew what he was doing. He came up with this incredible. I personally didn't like it. It was kind of, for me, like John Cage. Uh-huh. It was, I'm not interested in Symphony for 12 radios.
The open-mindedness of the coast was out of control. I mean, that dude was out of control. He was.
You have to understand something about San Francisco and the Bay Area. We were the culmination of the Wild West. And it was nothing. The population of San Francisco was 300 in 1847. In 1848, when they discovered gold, and in 1849, when the gold rush started, the San Francisco population doubled every 10 days. And all of a sudden, everybody came. They brought all these ships into the harbor and abandoned them. They just got off the ship and went up to the gold fields. And the harbor was flushed with ships. They sunk most of them and built on top of them. So every time they build something down in the financial district of San Francisco and they dig down, they find a boat. And then everything has to stop and they have to dig out all the stuff. And it's really interesting. But it was a place of wild times. I mean, it was a kind of a lawless place for a long time, and in the days of the 30s and 40s, it was a pretty corrupt town. You could get away with just about anything. They were pretty much bought off. For example, there was a lady named Sally Stanford, who was a madam, and she had a very exclusive, huge mansion in Pacific Heights, one of the best neighborhoods in the city. And at 9 o'clock at night, you'd find the mayor and the city council and the police chief, and everybody was there. Right. And it wasn't just a house of prostitution, it was a social club in a way. Well, when I think it was Rolfe got elected mayor, and he was a cleanup guy. And so they went to her and said, Sally, we can't protect you anymore. You're going to have to close it down. So she closed it down and sold the house and moved over to Sausalito and opened a restaurant. And that was the end of that. But, it still has always been a very open town in that regard. I mean, look at the different ethnic and sociological groups that have come to San Francisco and been allowed to flourish here. The gay community. There was always a gay neighborhood over on Polk Street. It was small, but everybody knew that. I used to go there to get clothes because they had great clothes. Sure. And I take girls to the restaurants there because the waiters would treat me better than them. And they'd hate it. I don't want to come here anymore. It was. Then of course the what do you call it? The Castro thing all happened, and now it became a big thing. But it was there, and there's all the ethnic neighborhoods like New York. There's the Italian and the Jewish and the Mexican and the Greek, and all the different ethnic groups had their little neighborhoods and places where they had their clubs and their food and all the stuff. And it was very open. It was just one of those towns. There were certain prejudices. The cops were not really cool to the gay community. They had to be very careful about, a lot of raids went on. I played some of the gay clubs back in the early 60s, and boy, man, it was pretty tough on them. They beat them up. They did all kinds of stuff. Because it
was really just like, it was against the law? I'm trying to figure this out. Why were they raiding the club?
Oh, I think it was. Actually, there were laws against
Unbelievable. It. Even in Frisco there were.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah, they had, there was a place called the Chucker. Had a black front with yellow letters over the front of it in the top that said, "Caution, enter here at your own risk. We are subject to being raided at any time by the San Francisco Police Department under Penal Code section whatever."
Right.
And we'd be playing, and we didn't look out because it was pretty outrageous. It was in the Tenderloin, and these were some of the more outrageous people. But they paid us well, and they left us alone. And you're a musician. I'm sorry, but in those days, we were just whores. We'll take any gig. We don't care. We need
absolutely,
the money.
Absolutely.
And so, we weren't judgmental. We played there, and we played a place called the Sir Club, which was very high-end gay. These guys had money, and they were really dressed well and spent a lot of it, and they were very nice to us. But the Chucker, when the cops would come in, the bartender would scoop up a little pitcher of ice and heave it at the band. When you got hit with flying ice, it was shut up and we're getting ready. We'll be right back on the air in 15 minutes. That's generally what happened.
Boy, you have I'll tell you, you have really seen a lot of shit, man, in your life. At this point...
Oh, yeah, that's why I'm writing most of these stories down, because every time, discussing things with friends of mine, some who've gone through a lot of this too, it's like, you got to write them down. And I had friends who are writers and authors and so forth want a ghostwriter help. So I've been writing them down, and like I said, I've got about 30 written, and I'm just going to keep going. I don't know if it's a book or not, and I really don't care. It's just going to be...
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that is the most brilliant. In fact, I have to say, we didn't get to most of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about tonight, because we just were off on all these tangents.
So, well, I guess so. What did you want to talk about?
Well, basically Sutter Street, and also after the three dudes freaked out on acid and went away, your musical career from that point forward, what were you doing?
What I did then, let's see.
Here's what I'm thinking is I got to go take care of my family. So maybe just weekend. Do you want to finish? Do a third set this weekend?
We could do that. It would have to. I've got a gig tomorrow night, so it would have to be probably Sunday.
Yeah, let's do Sunday night. This slot.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right, we'll hit it again, and have a ball tomorrow night, man.
I will, man. You too.
Take care, brother.
Take care. God bless you and your family.
All right, brother.
All right.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Welcome back. This is part 3 of my interview with Jim Stern. I have no idea how long this is going to go, but really just been enjoying the time. And Jim, welcome back, man.
Well, thank you, Jake. It's a welcoming feeling, and I appreciate it, and I'm happy to be back.
How did the gig go last night? I'm really curious about that.
Oh, man, it was a gas. Well, first of all, I got to say that Phil Lesh, I think his wife actually, I'm not sure, but somebody said his wife actually set up the place and runs the place or whatever. I don't know. But it's called Terrapin Crossroads. Terrapin Station was an album, which I forgot. But Terrapin Crossroads it's a great place. It used to be called I can't remember. It was a fish house in San Rafael. They took it over, and it's a spectacular facility. They did a beautiful job. The place was packed constantly. Outside terrace was all packed.
Wow.
People coming and going.
Wow.
And so we played. I think, with the exception of about 4 years, the entire band's age added up to my age.
Wait, no, but it was...
They're all, they all graduated college. They went to State, or they went to Cal, Santa Cruz, or whatever. They all got their degrees in music, and they're all these young Turks playing little butts off in their 20s. And they're really good. They really were. And it was great. I got there, and there was a set of drums, but no cymbals. And I said, oh, my God, they didn't tell me to bring cymbals. And they said, oh, guy, the sound guy who does all the work, he is a Petaluma kid, and I know, we all knew all these things. Oh, come on, and he got me a set of cymbals, and we got it all set up, and we played, and gee, it was great. I was really surprised, and there was a rock band came in after us. We were the 6:30 to 8:30, jazz dinner music. We were playing bebop, but still, and. It was just a lot of fun. Boy, they knew every tune they played, and we had a lot of fun playing them, and they all could play, and I had a really great time. It was a lot of fun.
Did you I know you mentioned Art Blakey, growing up.
Yeah.
Did you listen to guys like Mickey Roker? Who were some of the drummers that you loved to listen?
Oh, yeah, I listened to Mickey. I listened to everybody.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I listened to everybody.
Right.
I took something from Max Roach. Everybody took something from Max Roach. God bless Max Roach. I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever play jazz, Max Roach is in your music somewhere, because you listen to somebody who listened to somebody who listened to him. But,
right.
because Max Roach and Kenny Kenny Clark took, it used to be all the quarter notes were on the bass drum. Doom, 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 doom. You listen to all that old 1930s swing stuff and all. The bass drum was on the quarter notes, and they put it on the ride cymbal. Ding, 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 ding. And it changed everything, because now you could go doom with the bass drum wherever you wanted, and you could go back on your snare drum wherever you wanted, because everything was in ding, 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 ding on the ride cymbal. Changed the entire jazz music. And I love those.
Kenny Clark. Yeah, Kenny Clark, man.
Kluke. Oh, he was amazing. And so, everybody listened to them, and then people listened to them. It's just like, okay, people listen to Muddy Waters, and they listen to Jimmy Reed, and then they listen to Eric Clapton, and then they listen to Jimmy Page, and then they listen to, I think it was now the kids today, they've listened to everybody. And now the kids today, they know all of that because they had the stuff that we had, and then the stuff after us, and the stuff after us, And so as it builds, the new kids, like this, there was a keyboard player in this band. He's 27 years old, and my God, this kid was killer. He just was amazing.
Did he have his own? I mean, do you find? I think here's the question that I've been waiting to. This is like an opportune time. Is that I think we can agree that there's a huge amount of talent out there, kids that have, huge chops. But I want to ask you, when you went across, when I interviewed Cosby, he would talk about being, you could put a blindfold on him and throw a record on and not show him the record. He could tell you if it was Tony Williams.
I know exactly.
Okay, so what I'm saying is there was Max Roach, Tony Williams. You go on and on and on. Every instrument, Lee Morgan, Donald Byrd, Blue Mitchell, they all had their own sound.
Yeah.
So tell me, are these cats? Do they have their own? Why was that individual sound so palpable? Cal had his own sound. Everyone had their own sound.
Everybody did in those days because they were creating it. Chuck Berry had his own sound.
Right.
Nobody sounded like Chuck Berry before Chuck Berry. Nobody sounded like Bill Haley before Bill Haley. Nobody sounded like Frank Sinatra before Frank Sinatra. Everybody had their piece of what it was. So, what in those days, those guys listened to whoever was before them, and they brought themselves into it. And then the next generation listened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the guys before them, and then they brought themselves into that. So it just evolves as it goes. And so these guys, they're in their 20s right now. They've been listening to all these amazing players. So like this kid, okay, so it's very hard sometimes for these young players to be relaxed and comfortable in the changes and the music enough to be able to bring in something else. Like you'll be playing along in the changes, and you're in the autumn leaves going to fall, and then in the middle of it you go da 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 da. Something you're in MASH. How did you get in MASH? But it's the same changes. So these guys will be able to take melodies from other tunes and pop them in here and there, and it excites the musicians. And back in the days of jazz, it would excite the audience because they were a hip audience. So they'd hear somebody quote another tune in this tune, it would drive them nuts. Oh my God, listen to that! But most of the young guys coming out, they're still learning chops. Right. They're still trying to get facility. So they're doing, they're showing up. They're moving stuff in there, and they're working at it. And but like this kid last night, he was relaxed, and he was like, "Oh, this is that." And he pops in a little melody. It was like, "Oh, wow, man, he's above that already."
Right.
Which is just
right. He doesn't know it yet, though. He doesn't know. He doesn't even realize.
Yes, he does. Oh, absolutely. Oh no, none of this is happenstance. When you know exactly where you are.
Wow. So I mean, but what? So like, how did you? I mean, I think the missing link here is why did they call you for the gig?
Okay, now the missing link here is why did they call me for the gig?
No, we never got that. We never got to that.
Well, the bass player. I knew the bass player's mother was in a vocal group that did some backgrounds for me on some records I did. And I produced a little demo for them, and they went their own way. How it is, everybody goes through all this stuff. But I knew his mother and his father before he was born. And his father passed away, but his mother, I've known her forever. And so I didn't even know that I knew him. But somebody in our Monday Night Bebop group said, hey, there's this young kid I played with, and you might, maybe we should. And I said, well, give me his number. I'll give him a call, and we'll get him in and see if he can play. Because that's what we do. We've gone through 150 musicians in the last 20 years, just, rotating people through. So I called him, and he came. And he's 23. He graduated from State. He learned from my buddy, Andrew Spate, who took Cannonball's place when Cannonball passed away.
Wow.
And we had a lot of, he and I are very good friends. I love him. He's a sweetheart. And he took him off a guitar. He said, you might be an okay guitarist, but if you switch to bass, you can make make a living. So he switched to bass, and ever since then, the kid's been just nice. He's lights out. So, I've gotten him into our Monday night group every now and then. He comes in and sits in with us on Monday night. I rotate about 6 or 8 bass players through, and he's one of them.
One of the first albums, at least that I saw you, that at least you got credit for, was this album with Alice Stewart. How did you?
Yes.
And can you talk about how you even met her, and then?
I met Alice. Alice was playing in the San Francisco Bay Area folk scene. And she had played bass in the Commander Cody band. Mm. And I was the staff drummer at Fantasy. And they were interested in her. So everybody checked her out and everything. And they signed her. And I played drums on a bunch of the album. And I was listed as spiritual advisor because I was kind of a cohesive force in keeping it together. Those were the beginning days of me making the transition into engineer, because I was kind of holding a lot of stuff together that were falling out because I'd already played the drums, so now what am I doing there? Well, I have certain abilities and talents that they were using, so I was able to kind of, make things better for everybody when things were going not so well or whatever, and just, help everything out. So I was also listed as spiritual advisor.
Well, can you provide an example of that? I'm very curious about that.
Oh, sometimes in the studios, miscommunications get in the way, agendas get in the way. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah,
exactly. You got to you got to know how to deal with these people.
And egos are supreme in that. So when somebody has no ego buy-in, and that was me, can stand up and gently say, why don't we move here?
Right.
And everybody knows I'm right, and I have no buy-in, and I'm just sort of, let's go with Jim.
Right. You diffuse everything.
That was kind of one of the things that helped me throughout my entire engineering career, especially with Van Morrison, because I really understood that that's the real essence of production, is to be able to unblock the flows. You set up what you want. You can write the charts, you can call the musicians, you can do whatever you want. But when the flow isn't happening, if you can't identify where the blockage is and release the blockage and let the flow happen, you're not going to get the product. And I learned that, I think, in those days. I didn't really realize it, I'll be honest. I don't think I realized it. But intrinsically, I learned that.
Yeah, they dubbed you the spiritual advisor. That's what you were unblocking those flows at that time.
And that was the time when I was moving from drummer to engineer producer. I really was in that transitional mode. So, I guess spiritual advisor was a good transition label, huh?
Your whole time. I mean, you are very well. You straddle both ends. I mean, you played music, but you've also been a master of sound. A lot of musicians are also obsessed with sound as well. When did you meet John Kahn?
John Kahn. I met John Kahn. He was playing in, I don't know if you can say this on the air, so you may have to bleep me.
Yeah.
But there was a band called the Tits and Ass Band.
Yeah, with Bob Jones.
Bobby Jones. I loved Bobby. Bobby was playing guitar in the band at the time. He later became her old man and played drums in Alice Stewart's band.
No.
Take a look at her second album.
Oh my, because I did the last album with Bobby before he passed away.
Oh, God bless him. I love that guy.
I loved him, and yeah, he was in the Wee Five. That was more the folk period that you.
The Wee Five. Exactly. I was just going to say, you know, Bobby. Okay, so on that album, I'm in my office, and Alice and Bob come in and say, "Jim, we want you to come in. We're having trouble with time." I said, "Well, I have some great metronomes." No, we don't want a metronome. We want a human. So they paid me scale and put me in an ISO booth with a what do you call it? A stool and a stick and a microphone. And I went tick, 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 and I kept time while they cut the track. Oh. God bless him. I
love that.
Oh, Bob. So Bob was playing guitar in the TNA band, and John Conn was the bass player. Bill Fitt was the drummer, as I remember.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think of who else. And we were all in the same scene. So
you know who was in it? It was Ron Stallings was in that band.
Rev Stallings. That's right.
Yeah, Rev
was in that band.
Rev.
And so we were all kind of in the same era of the same mix of the city, and so we would bump into each other here and there. I can't specifically tell you what events or times or studio things or whatever where it was where we met, or I have no idea. But somewhere in there, probably a number of times in various places, we connected until we, eventually became friends, and so we all, knew each other well.
Right.
But and John Conn played on Alice Stewart's album.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Was that did you actually you've played with John in the studio?
I didn't play on those tracks. What's his name? I can see his face.
There was a guy named Funk too. Someone named Funk on organ, and then
that was an overdub.
Yeah, you know this better than I do.
I'm trying to think of I can't think of the name of the drummer. He played. He played on one or two tracks. It was John Conn, and I'm trying to remember. I can see the studio and I can see the players. I just can't remember some of the names.
Right. No,
I'm Louis Asen. Louis Asen played guitar on that album. Now, I think he played on some of the tracks I played on, some of the tracks they played on. But it was a kind of a conglomerate. In those days, we did tracks as we could, and various players for various. It wasn't the days when everything became homogeneous. You used one drummer, one bass player, and one guitar player and keyboard player through the whole track, the whole album. That became the standard after a while, and it morphed back to where you could do different tracks from different rhythm sections and so forth. But for a while, it kind of solidified into this amorphous. Everybody has to play the same thing on every track or whatever. But in those days, it kind of mixed up a little bit, and that album was cut over a period of time. But yeah, those were great times. Those were really, and that was cut at the Old Fantasy. That was cut at 30th and Peralta Street on a Scully 8-track with no console, just microphones plugged directly into the tape recorder, an 8-track.
There was something I used to have that album. There was something very
Full-Time Woman.
Thank you.
Full-Time Woman, Alice Stewart. It's a picture of her sitting on a motorcycle and her little son. Oh God, I can't remember his name anymore. He's praising God. He's about 30 or 40 years old by now. Jesse, and he's standing there. Oh man, you're taking me back. You're really taking me back here.
I know, and this is when I'll send you my interview with Bob Jones, because what he said, he goes, he said the same thing. He goes, what I love about your show, one of the slants of my show is that it's going back to these regional music scenes, and there was no scene that was more. I don't even know what the right word, just percolating than that scene. It was the Bay Area was just incredible, and so it's intoxicating for me. And I realized that it was sloppy at times and full of plenty of warts and stuff. But I wasn't there, and I can only say,
but you're right, and that's amazing that you realize that.
Yeah. Well, it's because my soul is sort of connected. Wayne Henderson, all right, rest in peace. He told me, when we did our interview, he's like, "Man, you're one of us. You're just doing it on a totally different level." So it's kind of just locked in, and I really just really enjoy hearing authentic stories about how organic music was made. Nothing. There was very little in the way of of chop shop, but there was. I want to ask you this question. When you were hearing all the top 40 stuff and you wanted to get away, you wanted to get away from it. How did you get into writing your own music? Who were some of the influences?
Well, I can't really answer that, because when you start to write, you don't think of other people. You go, boom, 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 boom. Well, that sounds nice. Boom, 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 bum, ba-da-da, bum, ba-da-da, bum, ba-da-da, 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 and you go, wow, where did that come from? And you write it down, and the next thing you know, you're working it, and you're putting lyrics. It's a flow of creative process that comes from beyond me.
Not so much the your own individual creations, but the impetus to say, oh, actually, I want to write my own original music. There was a pocket of time there.
I've always been a creative person. I've always been, okay, how was I described? Somebody at Fantasy described me as a maverick.
That's okay. Why do they? Well, just because you.
Because everybody's looking for the crowd,
right?
And I'm over in the corner going, "Oh, that smells good. What's that?" And people look over and say, "Hey, what's Jim smelling?" I don't know. Let's go find out.
Oh,
and the next thing I know, I got a crowd around me.
Oh man, you're right.
That's
right.
a maverick.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm not following anybody. I never followed anyone. And you talk about mentors. Did we talk about Bill Putnam?
No, not yet. Please go ahead.
Let me say something about Bill Putnam.
Please.
God bless this man.
Yes.
Do you know who Bill Putnam was?
No, not at all.
United Recording. This is the man who really was the father of modern recording. He, if you look him up, he started recording. He came up with the consoles. He was an amazing man, and he's in all the Hall of Fames. He's an icon of the industry. Okay, so I'm building Fantasy. I'm this young drummer kid with a degree in electronics that's suddenly all of a sudden building Fantasy. And he calls me up. He says, "Hey, can we have lunch?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I go over to the city, and we have lunch. Now, I knew he owned Coast Recording in San Francisco and United Recording in L.A., and that he was, big L.A. guy, but I didn't really realize that he started all this shit. I didn't know who he was,
right.
that big of who he was. So we had lunch, and we talked. Very sweet man, very nice man, and we just got to know each other. And he said, "Look, I want you to come work for me." And I said, "Bill, I can't leave these people. I'm in the middle of building. I can't just walk out on this."
Right.
And I would never feel good about myself just to walk away and say, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to take more money and go to L.A." I just wouldn't. It's against my ethics to be able to do it. He said, I understand, don't worry. But if you decide ever to want to leave, please let me know. And can we get together now and then if I'm in town? I said, yeah. And every now and then, he would call me. Let's have lunch. And we'd have lunch and we'd talk. What's happening, Jimmy? And I would tell him, oh man, I got this. But you know how it is when you're doing you're building studios, you're doing sessions, you're hiring staff, you're training, you're building. I said, man, he'd say, listen, bubba-da, bubba-da, bubba. And I go, oh, thank you, Bill. He's the only person ever who mentored me. I loved the man. He was wonderful. It wasn't for probably, I got to be honest. I will really be honest here. This is embarrassing, but it really is the honest truth. It was got to be at least 20 years, maybe more, before I really found out who he was. And I thought to my God, oh my goodness, it's like an electric guitar person being mentored by Les Paul. It's like,
yeah.
Oh my goodness. I mean, he created all this stuff, and he was the man, and I didn't know. I could have sucked his brain. I should have gone to work for him. All these things, but I didn't know. But what always struck me was that his ego was not such that he was above the humanity of it all. He saw me, he wanted me, he understood where I was at and how I was positioned ethically and morally, and respected that, but supported me in a mentor way that nobody ever had done before or since. And so I just want to put a shout out to Bill Putnam, may he rest in peace.
Oh, that's beautiful, man. I mean, but did he become a mentor to you only after you realized the gravity of what he had done?
No, he was a mentor to me before I knew anything about who he was.
Even when you were going to those innocuous lunches, just hanging out.
Yeah, well, I didn't know who he was. I knew he owned the studio. I knew he had the studio in L.A.
Right. There was no internet.
He's a sweet guy, and he knows his stuff, and he's great, and he's able to help me. But I didn't know. There was no ego. He never told me who he was. I never checked him out. There was no internet or Google, And I was busy. I was working and playing, and who had time? He's this wonderful guy. And I'd go have lunch now and then, and he'll help me out, and I'd go back to the studio and jump into the fire. So I never really understood who he was, and it isn't that I kicked myself. It's that I feel, because he could look back and say, "Damn, I should have, or I could have, or I would have." But I look back and I think, how blessed I was. Wow, what a blessing that this man took me under his wing and helped me along. As reticent as I was, to join the family, he took me under his wing anyway, and then to find out he's like the man, it just blew my mind.
You were also pretty consumed with a lot of things, though, in your life at that point. It wasn't like you didn't have time to stop and sit around or try to check. I don't even know how you would find this stuff out. There was no internet back then. I mean, all you knew is that he had a studio. You couldn't look up his Wikipedia page or anything like that.
Exactly, but I probably could have worked at it. I could have tried that.
Yeah, you could have called Clyde Flowers. Clyde Flowers.
I could have called around.
Yeah,
I knew who he was. I knew he owned United Recording in L.A. and all, which I knew was a big studio. I mean, because he was offering me a big job in L.A. It wasn't some small-time studio. I knew he owned a major studio in L.A., and he was one of the top players in L.A. I mean, I knew that from the L.A. scene. But I knew other major players who owned major studios in L.A. I knew Dave Hassinger. I knew Ken Duncan, who I ended up running his studios for him later on. And I knew, it goes on and on, Wally Hyder and on. But what it comes down to is I didn't realize who he was before all of that, in the beginning of the industry.
Right.
How he started all this stuff. And you go back to pictures of him recording the first recordings that were going. I mean, he was an amazing man. And he could have been he could have been arrogant, whatever. But he wasn't.
Yeah, the larger point was that when you went to lunch, he wasn't stuffing all this stuff down your throat.
Nothing. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, that's incredible.
He never told me.
Yeah.
I never knew anything. He was fatherly.
Right.
He was fatherly. It was all about me. Me and him. And it never we didn't talk about anything to do with that. It was like, we talked about ourselves and what was going on for us, and mostly it was helping me. It's like, so tell me, did you do it this way? I said, well, yeah, I'm trying that right now, but he says, well, you may have to fire that guy. I said, yeah, that's what I figured, but I didn't want to really face it. He said, well, sometimes you have to harden up a little bit. I was a musician, and I was making this transition into being a manager of people and stuff, and it was a very tough transition at the time, because I really didn't want to do that. I had said no. It was Saul Zaentz who said, I don't care what you want. And so I ended up doing it. But it was a hard transition for me, and it was difficult, and I'm sure it was probably difficult on some of the people under me, because I was fighting a lot of things in those days trying to make that transition. I mean, I guess if you want it, if you're somebody who aspires to that, those are the guys with claws.
Right. Yep.
Then it's kind of easy, because you just claw your way right up and you're gone. I didn't want it, and I don't have any claws, so I'm fighting it on the way up. So I probably, elbowed a lot of people along the way, because I didn't know how to get there. Eventually got there, and I got better and better at it as the years went by. And I apologize to anybody who's listening who I pissed off or offended in those years. But,
no, I mean, honestly, I think that I think you're right. It's fascinating, though. Your value set came out of that the psychedelic period that you were. I mean, I got a call from Terry Haggerty today.
God bless him. Did you say hello solo for him?
No, I was like, I'm doing like a 3-part thing right now with, who knows, maybe a 5-part thing with Jim Stern. He's like, oh, I know Jim. I mean, it was just so classic. I'm like, this is the most interconnected group of soul brothers I've ever. You guys all kind of.
I love Terry Haggerty.
Yeah,
I love that guy. He's one of my brothers.
The Sons of Chan. No, I mean the So, can you?
You know about the Sons of Franklin?
I don't know about the Sons.
Okay, so Terry Haggerty and his brother Tim, and his father was Frank, and Frank was NBC staff guitarist.
Oh my God!
And they had a band called the Sons of Franklin, the two brothers. So if you talk to him next time, ask him about the Sons of Franklin.
Oh, I am apt. That is hysterical. I was going to ask you, what is?
I love him. Tell him hello. Tell him I love him.
I will. No, I mean Tell me about the. Do you remember the session doing? It's funny. I put an analog cassette tape in the car the other day. I still have an analog cassette deck in the car.
So do I.
You do too?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, great! It's the best sound. So I threw in this.
You know?
I transferred at some point in a delusional state. I transferred Canyon Lady, Joe Henderson.
Joe Henderson, I did that.
Okay, Mark Levine wrote 2 tracks on there, All Things Considered, and there's another track. Really, and there was so much. There was Carmelo Garcia. There was so many.
Victor Pantoja, Carmelo Garcia.
Exactly. I'm like, how did Stern figure out? Was that cut all together, or was there people coming in different time? How did that? Because that John Hurd smokes on George Duke's on there. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, some of it was overdubbed. Some of it was the basic rhythm section and all was pretty much together. But some of it was overdubbed. It took some because the problem is that people were working and on the road, so you could get them for a day or two, and that was it. And so they were out of town again. So we'd have to do those in sections because in rock and roll, it was the band. You booked a month, you booked 2 weeks, whatever it was. If it was REO Speedwagon when I was at Kendon, they'd block out the studio for 2 months or whatever it was, and they just move in. And it's theirs, and,
right.
And that's why we built Studio D down the street, because it was all by itself. It had a bedroom, it had kitchen, it had a roof garden, it had everything you needed. It was a complete, wonderful studio, and it was yours, and you were all by yourself. So, all the heavy rock artists, REO and Oingo Boingo, in those days, all those people would go down there, and they would just live in the studio, and that was wonderful. But in this kind of an atmosphere with these kind of people, they didn't have that kind of money. They weren't making those kind of bucks at their gigs and with their record sales. So they had to, go out and work, and that's where they made most of their money. And then they come into the studio when they could. And a lot of these people didn't all play together at the same time. They weren't in the same band. So to get everybody to do it, like George Duke wasn't available maybe when we did something, or maybe one of the other guys wasn't available when we did. So they'd come in when they could and overdub it. And but there's certain things that you just don't want to overdub.
Right. Well, no. I'm curious when you say the rhythm section was intact. I mean, so you'd bring in.
I would say bass, drums, keyboards, probably percussion, and maybe guitar. Would be probably all done at once, along with, a lot of times the whole thing, most of those things, like with the Joe Henderson stuff and all, that was done all at once. Most of it was done all at once because those guys, they weren't used to that kind of overdub atmosphere.
Right.
And what we did in those days, and I'll tell you what, I've been doing the same thing. My buddy Peter Welker and I, for the last, God knows, we've been friends for 40 years. I've done 5 or 6 of his albums. And we do the same thing, where we'll just leave, okay, rhythm section, just play 2 choruses nicely,
right,
and leave it open,
right,
because the guy can't be here, and we'll overdub him on his solo. So the guy would fly in, and we'd overdub a solo. That's it. Everything else was there. It all fit smooth. Everything fit together, because we didn't just, do something. It just left space for him to play a solo. So he'd overdub a solo. Then later we could do it over the wire. Wow. We could do it live from Chicago. Ooh, over this. But then it was weird. And now we don't even bother. Okay, so I did the last couple of Peter albums. We did this thing. I sent a stereo track on an email to Freddie Lipsius at Berklee School of Music, and Freddie pops it up on the thing, drops it onto a multi-track, plays his solo, and sends it back to me. And it's all done by email, and it's all done overnight. And the next day I got a solo, and it didn't, and it's wonderful, and everything drops and fits in. We did a whole thing with Pete Levin. You know who Pete Levin is?
Sure, yeah.
So we did a whole thing with Pete Levin. Pete and Tony played on this track, and Pete did all these things, and we went back and forth. And I think Freddie did some alto solos, and back. And it was all done by email. And I thought, God, if I'd have had all this and all this digital stuff back when I was making all those records, I could have done 10 times the amount of work I did. I could have made some of the things I did even 100% better than they are today. But hey.
No, I mean, yeah.
Hindsight is 100%.
Yeah, I mean, don't even. I mean, come on, man. I mean, at this point, it's like you have nothing to look back on and be. I think that the overarching thing is that when you can look at someone like myself, who's just very excited, pouring a lot of heart and soul, and saying the stuff that you cultivated at that time, it comes back to life in other forms later on, which is just the most magic. That's what makes music magic.
Well, that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, that's what this phone call is all about.
Yeah, these are legitimate, yeah, I mean, you'll meet me and I'm just a regular cat, but it's like, this is it took me about 2.5 years to really find my voice, but then, now it's like, you just go across the board and you're able to just seek wisdom and love and leadership from you cats, and you guys just continue to give it, and you have the street credentials. I think that was something that you were talking about before, speaking about Lipsius and blood, sweat, and tears. Like there was like a better balance between street scholars and actually being able to go into academia and write sophisticated horn charts. You look at Chicago or all those rock groups that were blending jazz aesthetics at that time, and there was a.
Yeah, but we did have the rock bands. We had Cold Blood. Cold Blood was a hot little horn band.
Is that where you met Peter Welker?
Peter Welker was. Yeah. You should check out Peter Welker, man. He's an amazing arranger and producer, and he's played with everybody and done it. Excuse me, he's a little older than I am.
Stern, I want to tell you something.
Dig in there. He's only about a year or two older than me.
No, I want to tell you something.
We're buddies for 40-something years, and he was in Cold Blood for years, and there was the of course the Electric Flag, but there was also the original it was called Sanpaku was the band. It was a blues horn band, and the exact same band with a different name and a different front was the Carlos Santana Blues Band. They were both the same, and they were kind of vying for who was kind of hit it in the Bay Area. But Sanpaku didn't have. They were both horn bands, and they both had this Latin horn band thing. And Sanpaku didn't really have a front person. It was just sort of this amorphous band. And Carlos was the front, and because of Carlos and the lead guitar and the front of it all, he kind of moved ahead of them. And then when Bill Graham picked him up, everything went from there, and they never heard of the other guys again.
But, no. What I want to tell you that this spiritual, you're going to freak out a little bit, but probably like 2 days ago, Peter Welker emailed me and was like, he just listened to my interview with Bill Champlin. We were going to set up an interview, but he just reached out to me. This cat, Peter Welker. I'm like, and then I read this story about you and him. Like, you guys are like so tight. I'm like, how is?
I just got off the phone with him a little while ago.
He didn't say anything about this. It's insane because he was.
We play music I told him. I just didn't mention your name. Maybe I did mention your name. I don't know. I might have mentioned your name.
Well, no, it's okay. You don't know. I need to. I
guess I did mention your name because I told him about this. Because he's the one that brought me into this bebop group on Monday nights. We play together every Monday night for 20 years, and we talk almost every day. We're best friends. We hang out all the time. I've done all his albums, and
well, then that's why we were meant to.
Oh, check him out, Peter. You'll love Peter. Peter's a great guy, man. Peter's an amazing man with an amazing. You know, I think Peter could have been much, much more well known and such had he wanted to go to L.A. and New York. But Peter loves it up here, and I don't blame him. I love it up here, and I think that. And I kept coming back, you know. So I think that he's had an amazing career, and he's very well known in a lot of areas, and he's played with a lot of amazing people, done a lot of amazing charts, and a lot of people have called upon him to write the charts for them. And I'm talking about people like Narada Michael Walton and so forth. So it's like,
wow.
You know, he may have some hot horn players now, but it's Peter that he relies on to write the charts. You know?
But I'm curious. I like the idea of him cajoling you back out onto the bandstand, though. He got you back playing.
Well, he got me playing jazz.
Yeah, that's what I mean. How did that come? I want to hear that story.
Okay, so Peter calls me one night, and he said, "Hey, Jim," he said, "you know, I'm in this rehearsal band on Monday nights." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know, it's a bebop rehearsal band and such." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we lost our drummer. We need a drummer." I said, "Peter, I'm a rock and R&B drummer. I haven't really been playing much in the last few years or whatever. You must be down to the bottom of the barrel." And he said, "Well, we don't have anybody involved." I said, "Well, all I can do is keep time. I don't have any chops in that there." He said, "Well, you played with all," he says, "all those great albums you did." And starts naming off, Cannonball, McCoy, and Sonny Rollins.
Sure.
Blah, 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 blah. I said, "But I wasn't in Duke Ellington's band. I wasn't in McCoy's band. I wasn't in Joe Henderson's band. I was, I either engineered or produced it, and maybe on an odd time here and there, I might have put on a percussion track because we didn't have anybody and I can play, so I would, I'm cheap. I come for nothing.
Right, no, I dig.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Go in there and put a cowbell down. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But, I wasn't in the band. He said, "Well, we can't play." I said, "Okay, I'll come. I can keep time." So, ding, chicka-ding, 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 chicka-ding for 2 years. That was all I would do. Hi-hat and ride cymbal. I had no chops. I had nothing.
Wow.
I didn't know what to do. And I was intimidated. But, they'd say fours. I'd say no, and they'd say yes. And so they'd give me, when it was time for my fours, I'd go ding, chicka-ding, 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 chicka-ding. I just wouldn't do anything. And so it took a while, and slowly I came out of it, and slowly I began to try, and I started working on some chops, and I started to get really better. And then 6 years ago, I had a stroke. And it turned out, when they scanned me, they said I'd had one previously, which I had no idea about. But I lost the whole left side of my body. And God bless the Petaluma Fire and Paramedic Department, because they got the clot buster in me within minutes. And I walked out of the hospital 24 hours later.
Oh, my God.
Everything on my... if you met me today, if you didn't know, you would absolutely never know I'd had a stroke. However, I'm numb on the left side of my body.
Wow.
I have very little feeling. Everything works pretty good. It's still pretty wonky. It's not perfect. I'd say it's 80%, 85%, maybe even 90%. But, and I play piano and guitar, and I practice all that stuff just as a rehab factor for me, So it's really pretty good. And so that kind of set me back a little bit. But what it did was make me kick back a little bit underneath it and realize where the groove was. And if you can't do as much as you were trying to do before, don't try that much. Just kind of push the groove along to where it was. And then suddenly my chops started to come back. And slowly by slowly, I'm getting to the point where it just comes out of my brain and it happens. I don't have to think about it and try for it. If I can think it, I can play it. And it's become a lot of fun. I got to tell you, it's a lot of fun. So it's 20 years now that they've been playing for 25 years. This friend of ours he's a retired United Airlines pilot, and he's a pretty good jazz trumpet player. and he and his wife own some business here in town, and they have some property out on the outside of town, and they had built this outside building where he has his shop downstairs, and they have it's a studio apartment actually upstairs, but we just leave all our stuff set up there, and we play there every Monday night for a couple of hours. We don't play gigs, we don't have audiences. We pull out the charts, and some of the greatest players that come through the Bay Area sometimes will come and play with us because they don't want to practice in a room somewhere. They don't want to do that. They'd much rather come and sit in and play and keep their chops up.
Oh, I never thought about that. That's
Pete Levin's played with us. Freddie's played with us.
Wow.
Oh my God! Lots of people who. A lot of times when Peter and I are doing albums and we have these guys in town for something, we'll have them come and play on Monday night. If we can get them there. So it's for me, it's been really a lot of fun, and I'm at the stage now where I have probably more confidence in myself as a jazz drummer than I've ever had in my life.